between humans and things, how they influence and shape each other, requires a comprehensive approach that brings together different perspectives and area of expertise. This collaboration between the University of Trento and the Fondazione Bruno Kessler exemplifies our commitment to fostering a deep and meaningful exchange of ideas. Our institution have a shared mission to advance research and contribute to society by addressing the complex challenges of our time. This event provides a unique opportunity to rethink traditional paradigms and explore new ways to understand the evolving dynamics between human beings and the material world. We look forward to fruitful discussion and a rich exchange of knowledge that will inspire new research direction and strengthen the cooperation between our academic communities. Thank you again, and I wish you all a successful and stimulating conference.
And also from my side, from FBK, a warm welcome. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this, I would say, fascinating event. I have to admit that when Richard and Sarah first approached me to introduce this event on behalf of FBK, I was surprised, both surprised and intrigued. But after that, I had a brief talk a few days ago with them. I understood that the relation between humans and things is far from obvious. And especially with the advance of recent technology, the usual dichotomy, clear separation between human things is blurring in some way. And really, with the new technologies like quantum technologies and also AI, artificial intelligence. So quantum technology will be the focus of very interesting talks today. For AI, I realized that even in the name of artificial intelligence, the very term is in some way blurring the distinction between humans and things, because intelligence usually is thought as a crucial and really unique characteristic of human beings or living beings, while artificial is used applied to inanimated objects. So I believe today this event is very interesting, and what I like of this event is the really truly multidisciplinary event. So we have two centers in FBK, the FBK Research Center in Religious Studies and the FBK Research Center in Sensor and Device that just apparently are far from each other. But today and tomorrow we'll discuss scientific issues together. We have the Faculty of Law of the University of Trento and other faculties of law of other universities. So we'll have engineers, physics, physicists, anthropologists, and lawyers, jurists, all talking together. This is something very interesting. I believe this kind of diversity in perspective will bring a great value to the scientific discussion. And compared to the AI, artificial intelligence, this is my area of research, what is very nice that you are anticipating this. We understood too late that we should have told to lawyers, to jurists, because it's clear that no AI application can really be delivered without new regulation and new rules. So this is a very timely event. I welcome you all, and really I wish you wonderful 2 days of scientific discussion, and also I wish you to enjoy living together these 2 days in Trento. Thank you very much.
Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Ugo Malvagna from the Law Faculty of the University of Trento. I will be the chair of this afternoon
First of all,
session.
I would like to thank
And as you probably all know, the first speaker today is Professor Ugo Mattei, who unfortunately wasn't able to make it to Trento during this day. So he has recorded his speech, which will be playing right now.
very deeply my former student and now colleague Andrea Pradi for inviting me to this, and especially for having taken the time to come all the way to my dacha in Chieri to take this little speech. I have been pursuing the materials of the conference in those last days, and I must say that studying the relationship between human beings and the furniture of the world, things around us, is a very important angle to understand the conditions today, the scholarly conditions today of our understanding in humanities and in science. The interdisciplinary approach is becoming again something almost mainstream now. It is very, very important to understand that we cannot actually observe anything without a vision from a variety of perspectives. Myself, in my previous work, I started doing interdisciplinary work with this book, Comparative Law and Economics, published in 1997, in which I took law and economics as a discipline that was developing at the time and then tried to enrich it with the approaches of comparative law. And that was one of the first moments in which I became aware of how much economics is embedded into positivism and how many assumptions, if are not challenged, are transforming a domain of scholarship into an ideology, especially when it comes to ideas, to legal ideas such as property, which is the legal tool through which lawyers deal with the issue of relationship between humans and things, and I'll come back later on this, and ownership and sovereignty, that is the power of the state, the power of the political to actually define and decide the rules of the game, the way in which we actually are supposed to operate in society to be acceptable individuals. I continued in that critique also by making myself helped by anthropologists with this other book that I published in 2008 with Laura Nader, an anthropologist. This time was a critique of rule of law ideology. And that was the first time in which at the end of the book, we started to think about an idea of a people's rule of law. That is to say, an idea of a rule of law that is disconnected from professionalism and from the dispositive that make law understood as a separate branch of knowledge, as a different thing from other process of collective decision making. We kind of entered in the line of thought, of critical thought, that dates back to peoples and scholars like Pashukanis and others, saying that the rule of law is the bourgeois ideology, is the way through which the bourgeois society naturalizes and therefore depoliticizes certain kinds of relationship of power in society, and especially the property relationship. And we are back there right into the idea of the relationship between the individual and the owner. And finally, in 2015, I produced with Spirit of Capra. This was a step forward in my evolution as a counter-disciplinary, I would prefer to say a non-disciplinated scholar. I tried to work with Spirit of Capra, who is a physicist, a system theorist, and a physicist that entered into the tradition of quantum physics through the work of Heisenberg and others. And with Fritjof, we kind of further developed the idea that the law cannot be seen as something that is out there, that is separated from us, but the law is strictly connected to the behaviors of individual particles of society, which are the individuals that are affected by the law. And therefore, the law cannot really be described as an object, as an out there, an object that is described by the subject within the Cartesian metaphor, you know, the separation of the subject and the object. But the law is to be understood just as in a phenomenological perspective, as the emergence of social behaviors that can be described only as matters of possible predictions of what will happen in social conflict. So the idea is to take away the law from its sort of objectified, petrified, naturalized structure of the human laws, dura lex sed lex, law that is placed out there and that should determine as a sort of immutable artifact our behavior, and substituting it with an idea of law as much more of an internalized way of behaving of individuals in society that deals and connects very much with culture, with politics, with economics, and with other domains. By so doing, we've been really going into the fundamental role that law and science have in organizing society. And the social organization is of modernity is certainly based on an observation. And the observation is that there are two different domains. A domains of the is, which is a domain of description, in which ideas such as the laws of Newton, for example. The laws of Newton are laws that describe what actually happens if you leave an object to fall down. Okay, so that description is something that happens no matter what in a very structured and certain predictable way. And then there is the idea of the human laws, the laws of us human beings, that is not something in the domain of the is, but is in the domain of the ought to be, what should be. Society, the political power, decides how society should be organized, how members of the society should behave, and therefore law-abiding individuals are those that behave in a way that is coherent with this normative vision of law. So these are two different domains according to a certain vision. If we are into the Cartesian idea of modern philosophy, these two visions are completely incompatible. So the idea of human laws and the idea of laws of nature, the laws of the humans and the laws of nature, are in two different incompatible domains. One is the domain of the is, and the other is the domain of the ought to be. Okay, but if we go into the into the postmodern, or how to say, into the quantum revolution, if you want to call it that way, so in the paradigmatic shift of the early 20th century, we will see that these ideas of the is and the ought are not really two separate domains. We're talking about something that is actually very much part of the same phenomenon. So you cannot really say that the laws of nature obey to an idea of is. You can never describe the reality if you come sufficiently close to it to see its complexity. Therefore, the reality only emerges pretty much determined by the point of observation. That is the fundamental intuition of quantum theory. On the other hand, the idea of so there is never an idea of the is. There is never a domain that is purely how things are, because things are always determined by the observer. And ex converso, there is not an idea of the ought to be that is completely normative, because the normativity is itself determined by how things are observed to begin with and how things are in the natural, so to say, domain of things. So these are very complex intuitions and very complex ideas to manage as lawyers. But if we think about it in the specificities of the legal profession, what the legal profession developed for was really to try to put together these two different ideas and visions in a very central domain, such as the accumulation of resources. In other words, we as lawyers have conceptualized the distinction between the is and the ought in the domain of property as the dimension of the being as separated from the dimension of the having. Okay, so the dimension of the being is the subjective dimension, and the dimension of the having is the objective dimension, the objects out there. And we look at the legal structure always within this sort of separation between the being and the having, the subject and the object, the subjective element of the tort as opposed to the objective element, what happens in the material situation, or the subjective element of a crime, so if I do it on purpose or not, and the result of the crime itself in the legal world. So we organize all our materials that way. And this organization of materials around this having and being separation is actually determined by the very political function of lawyers, because we assume that the appetites in the dimension of being are infinite. So individuals in society are really infinite in their desires. Our bodies kind of desire everything all the time. The Homo economicus, as depicted in the dominant anthropological vision, is some guy that tries to have as much as possible. Okay. On the other hand, we construct as finite the objects that you can own. So the idea of scarcity, this is behind, economics, for example. Economics as a social science assumes the fact that there is a subjective element that always desires something and that there are limited resources, and therefore the law of supply and demand, for example, is basically an attempt to create a balance between this infinite desire on the one hand and this finite number of things on the other, which is determined by scarcity. But all of that vision, that is actually really an attempt to justify the status quo and the relationship of power of the present. In fact, we now know that the appetites are not infinite. A lot of people, the Homo economicus as a metaphor has been challenged quite a lot. The whole literature, for example, on commoning and on the commons show very well that selfishness cannot be considered a natural attribute of individuals. It's just something that we have constructed as a dress to the modern individual. The bourgeois individual constructed as a rational maximizer is clearly, in a way, a fiction. We know that there are out there now, as obviously in the past, a lot of different behaviors other than just the accumulative instinct. On the other hand, the scarcity of resources is very much something that is artificially created. It is very clear to see that, for example, when we come to the actual phase of cognitive capitalism, that scarcity requires a construction in the law, for example, by creating intellectual property rights. In information, there is no scarcity. Scarcity is actually constructed by the law. If I give you an information and you give me an information back, both of us have two information. So 2 + 2 makes 4. Then if I exchange my 4 information for your 4 information, again, there is a production of more and more information, which is not scarce at all. The way to make information scarce is to construct a legal structure called intellectual property around information in order to make that scarce to fit the dominant model of supply-demand that we want to construct as natural. So all of that is entering in quite a bit of a crisis once we look at it from closer enough. If we look at things from closer enough, we will see things that are quite different. However, it is true that lawyers always had to produce and to deal, to produce models that are able to deal with the tension between individuals or more than individuals claiming to obtain something scarce. Ne cives ad arma veniam, because citizens don't come to the arms. The legal system develops so that if two people require the same thing in the same moment, there is a way to solve that conflict other than having a brutal fight between them. International law, whatever we see now, how international law really doesn't work at all in the current crisis in Palestine more than any other time in human history, probably. International law was developed in order to avoid armed conflict about territory. The idea is, you know, territorial conflicts that are always there because territory is part of the power of a nation have to be solved not through bombs, but through rules and through principles that can then be applied. That was a great, you know, a great desire, a great dream that proved very difficult to put in practice. But this shows pretty much how limited is the intellectual domain of lawyers. Lawyers have an intellectual domain which is limited by very practical functions. And this explains also quite well, in turn, the way in which lawyers have been claiming their role in society and how much lawyers became, or better, did not become, very visible and famous figures comparable to, for example, great scientists or great philosophers. That was one of the issues that we kind of discussed with Capra in the book. How come that certain figures of mathematicians or scientists became world famous? For example, the Newtonian revolution is after the name of Isaac Newton, or modernity after the name of Cartesian or René Descartes. But the great lawyers that also produce the fundamental structure of our modern time, people like Jean Domas in the French civil law, or people like Blackstone in the English and American legal tradition, or people like Ugo Grotius, these are all towering figures that for lawyers, but that are not really considered part of the builders of the ideology of the intellectual structure of our current world. Why? Probably because lawyers are in a way dealing with a domain that requires which is very much more in the nature of technology than in the nature of science. Okay? Science is then translated into practical relationship through technology. Science goes from the domain of knowledge, the domain of being knowledgeable, into domain of producing artifacts, of doing things in societies, of creating the world, the objective world around us through technology. You need Newton we see his ideas, and then you can build better bridges, for example. You know, you have the theory, and then they have the practice, the technological translation of the theory into practice. In the law is pretty much the way in which you translate the political power into rules that are obeyed by individuals in society and make power effective. So power is arbitrary by definition, creates a relationship of subjugation. This subjugation relationship of the powerful on the powerless is then taken over by the lawyers that through their work legitimize this arbitrary power, legitimize the relationship that gives to certain people certain things and to other people absolutely nothing, legitimizes the relationship of extractions and the relationship of exploitations as, natural consequences of a well-ordered society. And this ideological role of lawyers is kind of behind the scene and is something that is very much required by power in the moment in which power really requires to be legitimized. Lawyers have had a big impact in the evolution of society because they were actually needed to power. First of all, to establish itself. The conquest create a military might, but then the military is created by military might, but then military might, the fist, has to be translated into institutional organizations that work pretty much with less power than otherwise would be required. You cannot really dominate a society without an ideological hegemonic component of your relationship of power. And this is where lawyers are really important. In accumulating capital, for example, lawyers have been really important in formalizing the property relationship in such a way that property can be translated from use value, you know, what it's always enjoyed by each one of us with the furniture of the world, into exchange value. So in order to transform use value into exchange value, in order to translate in a way property in the domain of the needs of individuals into property in the domain of the needs of the accumulation and therefore of corporation that have much more property that would be ever actually needed by them. You know, this process requires lawyers. This process required historically lawyers to create some degree of professionalism that allows stability, and then stability is itself necessary in order to transform use value into exchange value. Big role of lawyers. What lawyers get in consideration of that from their ideological point of view, well, they get some taming of the worst aspects of exploitation. Lawyers were actually active during the Conquista in the 16th and 17th century in Latin America during the ages of plunder. Lawyers were active out there to try to persuade the dominant powers that, well, you know, Indians, for example, are humans and therefore should have some rights. They should be recognized in some subjectivity. The big debate on whether you could enslave freely, you know, the Latin Americans to put them to work into the mines in Potosí and other places like that, and how you had to treat them, whether you could exploit them to death or not. You know, ideas like that were actually discussed in legal terms in academic circles, by, you know, Jesuit jurists and all people like that, and produced some level of you know, humanism, some level of recognition that power should not be completely without gloves. Okay, that some respect is due to the very fact of being human. Very similar on the debate, you know, this has a lot to do with what you're talking about in this conference, the debate on slavery. Humans were objects of property in a certain moment. So you could consider a human part of the dimension of having of another human, much more than part in the dimension of being of itself, that it was slavery. Humans that were made objects. Economically, the things went on and on and on because, of course, you needed slaves in order to develop capitalism at the beginning. But then, you know, some result in the abolition of slavery in abolitionist circles was actually based on legal arguments. If you are a human being, you are a rational person like many slaves were, you cannot be made the pure object of the will of someone else. And so the anti-slavery was part of, you know, the role of lawyers in civilizing society. So they could get some results, some results in emancipation in the, you know, as consideration of their role in allowing capital to be accumulated. Today, we are in a very different phase. We are again in a phase of a paradigm shift. The quantum shift, you know, the paradigmatic revolution that has challenged the Newtonian ideas as mechanistic, and the going beyond mechanicism into visions of society that are much more holistic, are really kind of translating things, transforming things pretty radically. The political dimension is back in the scene. Politics that was basically marginalized as marginalized from science. You know, we kept politics on the one side and science on the other, and we have constructed science in a naturalistic, non-political way, has now returned very dramatically into the picture. Now we know that science and politics are connected with each other very much. We learned that in many moments, the pandemic in particular, but also before. Also, law and politics have been merged again in a variety of critical approaches to law, including in parts of comparative law, critical legal studies, and many others, law and political economy, as it's called today. Many people have been seeing that, again, there is a merger. There is a commission. We cannot anymore maintain the nice formal structure of knowledge that we used to develop modernity. And this is creating a very interesting phenomenon of marginalization of lawyers in creating the rules of the game. Politics is now doesn't need lawyers anymore because the technological transformation of the present gave to power a tool of exercising its might that doesn't require legitimation by the lawyers anymore. Things happen that way. Take it or leave it. It's like when we live online, you will have the next session this afternoon of this conference, or tomorrow morning of this conference, exactly on this question, you know, the non-material. Now we are in a non-material world, and it seems to me that lawyers were technologically necessary in translating politics into human behaviors within a mechanistic vision and in a certain kind of technological evolution process. Today, in the domain of dematerialization, the transformation doesn't need the lawyers anymore. It's like it's like if Newton and the modernity required lawyers, whereas the quantum Heisenberg and the quantum vision doesn't require lawyers, because relationship requires cybernetics and technology in which lawyers don't understand very much. So this is my provocation for the next few hours of discussions. Thank you very much. I apologize for not being there, and I apologize in particular for the confusion of these remarks, but this is what I was able to produce. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank.
Well, Professor Mattei's speech was a really good guidance for us in order to start our works today. As what I didn't say before is that, roughly speaking, today's sessions is addressing reality. So, especially the interaction between the subject and things. Whereas, as Professor Mattei already said, tomorrow's session will be about virtuality. So the immaterial space or the virtual space that is ahead of us. Two interesting things that can be drawn from this speech is that, on the one hand, law is pretty much ideological, or should be demystified as ideological, and on the other hand, that it is rooted in other branches of science. And in this respect, we have tried to alternate lawyers and non-lawyers during these 2 days, and this enables me to introduce the next, or to be better said, the first speaker of this session, who is Richard Hall Wilton, a physicist, the director of the Sensor and Devices Center at Fondazione Bruno Kessler, who will be speaking on object and things.
It's functional. Yes, it's working. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Great. Thank you very much. And it's absolute. That was picking up from another microphone. Okay. It's absolutely wonderful to be here at this interdisciplinary dialogue. The first time I came across on it was in a wine bar about 300 meters from here, and I'm very happy that I got involved in it and so on. On the humans and things, you can see the title is Objects and Things, and given that I'm in the Sensors and Devices Center, you can understand that's very object-based. Okay, no problem. Okay. That's very object-based. But I think they're going to touch on what I say. It's going to touch on the more human aspects as well. So I'll come on to the subjects in a moment. I'm just going to show you two slides in terms of actually how, to a less commercial audience, I introduce the center, okay? Because I think it's relevant to this dialogue. So the first thing is in terms of actually what we do in the center. I describe it like this, okay? Essentially, we're doing art and creativity, but we're not doing it on canvases or walls. We're doing it on silicon, okay? So crafting things to a very fine scale, features and ability to scale, in 1D, 2D, 3D, sculpting on silicon. And then, if I think of that, and then, this is examples of things that we really do on silicon, okay? There are things which are lines and lines and lines, so just very features of 1D of great length, things in 2D and things in 3D, so real sculptures on silicon. And that's what we do in the center. And again, I think it comes back to there's a capability of technically doing something, but there's really the creativity, which is a very human aspect behind that. So that's just an introduction to the Sensors and Devices Center. So now I'm actually going to move on to what I was going to talk about. And I think in the abstract, there was a rose is a rose is a rose with a question mark, okay? And of course, one of the thoughts behind that is it's a statement, and I put it a question mark, and things are what they are, okay? And I'm actually going to just change a matter of perspective to actually see is the scale of our observation, does that actually defines what we see, okay? Because I think actually depending on the scale you look in there, and I think in the context of this sort of legal aspect, there was certainly a discussion in the wine bar about what, of course, law is defined around things, and those things are assumed to be things, okay? But actually, if you haven't defined it, or if you look at it in a different way, and it's not actually the thing you think it is, what is the law about? So that's where I'm going to go. And of course, we're going to take a sense of perspective on this, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all zoom out from the rose, okay, which I take as the central point. Go out to a sort of Earth level, galaxy level, universe level, and then in the second part, I will come back to the rose and I will zoom down, okay? And of course, in this, I'm neglecting the lesson from Douglas Adams that the last thing that life actually really needs is a sense of perspective. So let's zoom out from the rose. We've gone up to the Earth level. We've lost sight of the rose, okay? What do we see? So on the surface, we see the crust. There are the elemental composition that you see there, and everything else is very, very small fractions, okay? So actually you see, that actually there's very few elements that really make it up. And what's also interesting is that in the top sort of 9, carbon's not one of them. You tend to think, actually hydrogen as well, and you tend to think for life, there, but actually it's not there. And you can see the percentage there as well, that really, there's a vast difference between the various elements of 9 orders of magnitude between them. So that's the first thing. You've gone out and you've lost actually any sight of what's most of the composition of the rose, okay? Caroline Johnson will speak later today. She's a geoscientist. She probably won't say any more on this, but she'll give you more of a perspective like that. We go out further. you know, we come to the Milky Way. And, you know, so what is the galaxy we're in? It's a spiral galaxy, okay? It's 87,000 light years, which is completely impossible to get any sense of what that means. So a light year is 10 to the power of 13 kilometers. That, of course, means absolutely nothing because it's just big, okay? And 87,000 of it, okay? So it's 87 wide, it's 1,000 thick. So it's essentially a very thin plate, okay? And then we're somewhere down there, you know, a little bit below, well, quite a lot below the center towards the outside. At the center is a black hole that's been corrected by the spelling correction, okay? Which has a 4 million times the mass of the sun, okay? Again, we can't even imagine how much the sun is, and that sort of a huge number is really quite fantastic. The composition has nothing to do with what we see when we saw the Earth, okay? So we're now looking at the galaxy level. Essentially, we see 74% hydrogen, 24% helium, and then there's 2% left for absolutely everything else. And even that says nothing about what's in the galaxy, because if we calculate the mass of it in different ways, what we get for what we think of ordinary matter is about 15% of it, and 85% is dark matter. So that's saying that 85% of it, we really have very little understanding of what's there. We believe it's there, but we don't understand it. So pulling out even further to the universe as a whole, so if you look at the median point in the universe, it will be empty, okay? Because just most of the universe is empty, and it's just punctuated by clusters of or massive galaxies and so on. But the vast majority is just empty, okay? And again, if we look at what the universe is, you know, 5% ordinary matter, 25% dark matter, 70% dark energy, okay? So again, this misunderstanding or this lack of understanding about dark matter is even again dwarfed by the lack of understanding about dark energy, which we have an even less ideas about. So we can see stuff and we can understand stuff in great detail that we understand in terms of matter. And the rest of it, we can make guesses at. If we then look back at the earliest light that we can see, which is the cosmic microwave background, by light, it's actually at a temperature of about minus 270 degrees, okay? So it's of a very low energy, okay? We get this picture of the universe like this, okay? So there's some structure in it, but not much. And that's really the first light that we can see in the universe from about 380,000 years after the Big Bang. Good. So there we are. So we've gone out to the biggest scale. I'm now going to go back to a smaller scale now. And, you know, I think here there's always the saying of sort of, you know, fleas having smaller fleas on their backs to bite them and then ad infinitum, okay? So that's what we're going to do is we're just going to zoom back down in. Okay, so we come back to our starting point and we're going to go now to the cell level. We'll have a little detour into life and death, DNA, molecules and atoms, subatomic, subnuclear, and vacuum fluctuations. So the first thing at cell level, we go back in, we look at our cells in the rose petal. So the cell is the basic structure and functional division of life. You know, you can only see it under a microscope, except in very exceptional circumstances. And, you know, depending upon which life form you're looking at, something like 1 to 100 microns. So what that is that, you know, in a millimeter, you know, you have sort of 1,000 to 100 of them within a millimeter. 30 trillion cells in the human body of many different types, but that's the functional unit that life is made up of. You then think about, you know, life and death. So the left-hand picture, I was in Taiwan 2 weeks ago, and everything grows everywhere there, and that was a very nice tree in a park. And on the right-hand side is an unfortunate tree from it was absolutely lovely, and it got cut down in a car park near here. But somebody celebrated it with a sculpture. And again, you know, defining life is complex. There's over 200 working definitions of life, none of which are complete by themselves. So it's actually quite difficult to define what the breadth of life is, even though looking at those two, you probably wouldn't have too much difficulty categorizing each one. So going back in, DNA. So it's a double helix of identical information. Okay. It's long-term genetic information storage. That's what it is. And both in terms of the energy efficiency and the density of information, it is far beyond anything that we can do ourselves with technology. So if you could store information in there, it would be absolutely fantastic compared to today's technology. It's a few nanometers wide, and human DNA, if you stretched it, you can't stretch it out in a line, but if you did, it would be about 2 meters long. Okay, and that, of course, is within every cell. Replication, you basically unwind it into strands, and you use each as a template to replicate the information. And that is all done in a very neat little quantum chemistry machine, which if you actually see a description of it, is just science fiction. So, and that, of course, is biology in everything living. The replication rate is almost perfect. So it's a 1 in 10 million error rate, which is really quite good. But that error rate's really important, because if it was absolutely perfect, you would not be able to have the application of natural selection and evolution that you need actually to do a random search to improve stuff. So going down to the atomic level. So here we're down at 0.1 nanometers. So that's 10 to the minus 9. So 1/10,000 millionth of a meter. This is obviously the basic units of chemical elements. There's 118 of them, 94 occur naturally. All life contains carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, which is quite a small subset if you think about it. So now we're coming down to the next level. Okay, so all common matter that you observe every day is composed basically of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Okay, and that's it. Okay, the proton is 2 up quarks and a down quark. A neutron in itself is 2 down quarks and an up quark. Okay, that's incredibly simple. And then there's the whole list of other particles that make up the set, which are basically, in terms of the everyday interactions you see around them of matter, are irrelevant. But this is then the complete standard model of elementary particles, and they're relevant at particular higher energies. So now actually coming even further, looking inside a proton, and this time we're going to change the energy scale we look at it, okay? And this one I put in partly because it's actually my thesis topic from a very long time ago, okay? So you look at a proton, I've explained what a proton is, but as you actually look at it with a higher and higher energy scale, you see quarks and gluons with a smaller and smaller scale, okay? And you even get gluons coming in there. So basically, if you look at it with a low energy, you get exactly what I said before, which is an up-down quark. And then you start to see force-carrying particles, and you start to see quark pairs being created, okay? So this is saying that it's highly subjective and dependent upon the observer. And what you're doing is you're actually got enough energy that you're creating extra pairs of particles in there. And then, you know, at the smallest scale, as far as we know, maybe there are more fleas on the back biting that we don't know. You come essentially, if you look at a vacuum, essentially you can have temporary random fluctuations of energy at a point in space allowed by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And this is really weird. So this is a budget for borrowing energy. So I like to think of it like if you think back to the Enron scandal, it's essentially creative accountancy, and you're borrowing the money for the more money you borrow, the shorter amount of time you can get away with it. So, and that's really it. So the shorter amount of time, the larger fluctuation could be permitted. So this means even at the smallest scales of space, there are particle antiparticle pairs popping in and out of existence. So now we've come full circle, okay? Choose the circle of which Stonehenge you prefer. Okay. And so, you know, in terms of this perspective, you know, how does this actually help? Okay. I think, you know, as conclusion, it matters on how you view things, and there are options on how to view things. So take various perspectives on viewing things. The relativity of objects to each other is important. Observation is subjective. It can be mostly objective, but it is subjective, whatever it is. And also the definitions of thing and definitions and details matter. In terms of observation, I think, you know, I showed you various scales of observation. So in space, in time, in energy, life or inanimate. Okay. And I think this is also helpful in terms of thinking about creativity, decision-making, problem-solving, arbitration, etc. And different perspectives and scales give different information on the same thing. So with that, I will finish off. So, you know, basically in terms of the conclusions, what an object depends on the scale you look at it at. And, you know, scales can be space, time, state of life, energy, matter of perspective. I thought I was going after Sarah, so I'm giving her conclusion as well, okay? But she's going to basically show you different and complementary dimensions on what I showed on the same topic of change of perspective, okay? The other thing, of course, is said, which was said by Paolo as well, is that we're involved in a sort of beginning of a collaboration with the ISR, the Religious Studies and Ethics Center at FBK, and also the law faculty on the quantum society, looking into that. And that's really about exploring interdisciplinary collaboration, where it's about the humanities affecting science and about science affecting the humanities, and seeing for opportunities there, and especially in the context of the quantum revolution. Okay, and please get in contact if interested. So.
Thank you, Richard, for guiding us into the complexities of scientific observation of reality. And I'm also pleased to see that the Aaron case paved the way for new research areas in physics. And based on this, what the next speaker will do is to understand whether, as we as lawyers can draw some understandings in terms of methodology from physics. In fact, her speech will be about modern physics and comparative law approximating through abstract world maps. So please, Elena, go ahead.
Thank you, Ugo. I would like, first of all, to thank Andrea Pradi, who is the true scientific engine of this challenging event. I was asked to speak about comparative law and physics. That is not an easy task because these two disciplines do not really much attend one another. But I will just try to start a brainstorming that will be mostly focused on what we can learn from physics as comparative law scholars. Sorry. Discovering the essential nature of things, this is a definition, and a very ancient definition of physics. We could also say that, like in physics, we as comparatives, we investigate the very essential nature of things, of models, even if in our field, the law of things are of a social and cultural nature. And in its classical application, our discipline, comparative law, measures similarities and differences among models, some macro comparison and micro comparison, even going beyond the different ways in which these models are defined from a linguistic point of view. But with the passing of time, the same essence of comparative law as a cognitive and intellectual activity has made our perimeter of investigation expanding gradually. So from the simple comparison of legislation of different states that was at the very origin of comparative activity, to the analysis of the current legal phenomena like the globalization of the law and the global space of law. So comparative law often borders other fields of knowledge, but for the time being, physics is not, as I said, among the discipline frequently attended by comparatists. And I try to find some works connecting law and physics, and I found, of course, the beautiful work of Ugo Mattei and Capra, and then the work of Lawrence Tribe or Tribe, I apologize, I don't know the exact pronunciation of the family name, an article published in 1989 in Harvard Law Review focusing on what lawyer can learn from modern physics. According to Tripp, the intuition that guides physicists can enrich the comprehension of the social and legal issue, also illuminating direction in the legal phenomenon. And what I found interesting is that a similar mission was assigned to comparative law at the very beginning of our sciences. One of the founding fathers of comparative law during the Paris meeting at the beginning of last century qualified comparative law as the indicator of the legal orientation. Something like is illuminating the legal phenomenon from inside. But first, before going on, we need to disclose a depth comparative law as accumulated toward physics that is well known in comparative law circles, but not outside it. Because comparative law has developed for centuries as a sort of unstructured activity. In the past, jurists used simply to put legal data near each other. It were also thanks to the outstanding result reached in physics at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the, 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, that drag comparative law to be structured according to specific methods and pre-selected procedures and around research questions. So the aims and method of comparative law were defined for the first time during the Paris meeting at the beginning of the 20th century in the wake of some well-known Congress of Physics like the Congress of Veil. And so this is the depth we have toward physics as comparative law scholars. But now going back to an analysis of physics and comparative law, if we look back at the parallel evolutions of comparative law and physics, like many other sciences, physics and legal science have traced their path firstly according to abstract superordinate schemes, taking the form of an intellectual map of reality. In the initial phase of many sciences, abstraction was a very useful tool in designing the borders of the phenomenon under investigation. But the price that scientists had to pay in using abstracting models is that the more the system was accurate and precise, the more the distance from the real world was wide, whether natural or social. So it is well known that the idea of a mechanicistic conception of the world was created by Descartes. On the basis of this belief, according to Newton, the universe was a mechanical system operating according to the Newton's law of motions. And as this is well known, it was Einstein demonstrating that the space, the planet, and the stars are a unique whole, influencing one another. So the movement of the stars and the planet are influenced in the background, curving the space and changing the time. In this very moment, we had a new idea, also scooping out the word space and time. that started from Einstein idea, this word changed their meaning and they're not final and defined anymore. At the same time, on a subatomic level, the quantum theory has unfolded the reality. The reality is not made by fundamental brick, but rather of relationship at the subatomic level, in which, as Richard has explained very clearly, the observer is part of the game. In the word of Heisenberg, we are laying the foundation of a theory of quantum mechanics based on quantity relations that are in principle observable. So at that time, abstract concepts proved to be insufficient to describe the natural phenomena. No one, for instance, could find the forces that drive electrons in their strange jump and behaviors. And so the proposal of Heisenberg that is at the origin of the quantum theory is that let's observe phenomenon without superimposing a theoretical abstraction. If we move to the world of law, within the legal phenomenon, the process of abstractness starting with the creation of the Westphalian model of law, following the Peace of Westphalia, 1648, establishing the basis for a new geopolitical order in Europe, in which the power was distributed among states for the very first time. And the reaction of legal science was that of elaborating abstract system of norm valid for each individual state, which the wave of positivism became made more and more abstract and part of a hierarchical structure. Probably the pinnacle of this abstraction in law was reached with the juridical architectural building of the panditistic, the so-called Purta pyramid. That was a very abstract elaboration in law. It was elaborated in Germany by the panditistic school of law. And the aim was that of creating a system of legal concept precise enough to make any possible material fact in the reality, reconnected to a specific concept, and so concept regulated. So you see, this is the pyramid of the law property. So if you think a very simple situation in the reality in which someone is using someone property, according to the Purta pyramid, this material fact could be reconnected precisely to a concept, and so being regulated. Furthermore, this conception considered the legal system as a model that works mechanically. So the idea was the judge could apply what was written in a norm mechanically without being part of this process of creating the norm. So all that was destroyed in Germany by the welfare state, which a system in which needed, of course, of legislative instrument that was not suitable according to the pandectic system. So Purta abstract pyramid was not suitable, the suitable legal tool to regulate, for example, the social and the health system. This conception, this mechanical idea of the legal system applied mechanically by the judge, was also modified by the vision of comparative law. Through a process of observation, comparative law research has demonstrated that the judge applying the norm contribute to its definition. So the judge is part of the game together with the legislator, and the legal system is a playing field with many actors. So not only the legislator writing the norm, but also the judges, also the social environment, also the scholars, the doctrine. Norm can be elaborated in different way, even not verbally expressed. So both in physics and in the law, the incapability of grasping the reality has been the engine of some irreverent attempt of going beyond these superordinate schemes. In physics, we have Einstein, Heisenberg, and others. In comparative law, we have Sacco, Gambaro, Monateri, Mattei, and other scholars who propose to give up to the abstract model and to go through observation method. So to observe the reality as it is and to give up to formal classification and languages. So how can we learn from physics? This parallels in the evolution of these two sciences underlines how within the legal science, comparative law should embrace some of the intuition of physics and contribute to the understanding and definition of the global legal phenomena. We jurists are occupied with phenomena like the global juridical space, with a sort of regulatory regimes that operates beyond the state. At the supranational level, beyond the state, how the law is regulated within the state, we have, for instance, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, offering rules to the state in return of incentive. In this global space, there is not a hierarchical system regulating the behavior of the people, not a pre-established system of norm, not rights and duties, but in particular, we have interest. Interest of private entities, national government, global organization, which works and move together on the basis of incentive and bottom-up mechanism. So in the global environment, the enforcement is not imposed by norm, but facilitated by pre-established condition inducing compliance. And it is up to the interest of the parties to activate this mechanism. So the global space is a dynamic net, is a process in which the components are constantly moving and growing and influencing one another. So how could we deal with this environment as a comparative law scholars? First of all, I think that we could proceed more through observation of the result of this mechanism, abandoning mentally the idea that there is a global legal order. The elements of the global space are not isolated entities, but they are the integral ingredient of a whole, which is constantly moving and changing. So as in the case of the electrons jumping from one side to the other one, we cannot foresee what is going to happen, where they are moving, in which direction they are moving, but we can take note of it. Like in physics, we should accept latencies, approximation processes, and the persistence of open questions and problems. As well as the universe in physics, the global spaces law cannot be separated. It's a dynamic whole in which no juridical component are much more important than in the traditional legal system inside the state. As Pier Giuseppe Monateri has noted, the elite movement of actors are important at the global scale, space, and they have to be studied. So we should not limit ourselves to observe deformment, but also the forces we move deformment. So not only the legal scheme, but also the forces like the actors, the elitarian group that are facilitating, that are moving this legal element at the transnational level. So we also have a subatomic layer in the law. Another aspect that is important from my point of view is that even our intuitive understanding of the global space has evolved, our vocabulary has remained behind our intuition. So Einstein has definitely abolished the word time and space as a final word. Probably we should think about the definition of norm at the global level, because we have a tendency to assume that where there is no norm, there is no law. But at the transnational level, at the global level, we have soft law, we have incentives, we have a sanction driving behaviors. So an environment that probably needs new classification. And then furthermore, the term norm is influenced by the legal culture. So as Richard said in physics, even in comparative law, the observer has a role. So if we observe the norm from a Western law perspective, we might have a different vision if the norm is observed from a Far East perspective. So as Heisenberg has suggested, again, we are laying the foundation for a theory of quantum mechanisms based on quantity relations that are in principle observable. So I was wondering whether also in the global space, comparative law should lay the foundation for a theory based on juridical relations that are in principle observable. So in such a different context that affect the economic, political, and legal fields, it might be conceivable that the need and aspiration that are at the basis of the new vision of the relationship between human and thing will also be rethought according to this new category. But then I will leave the expert this final thought with regard to the relationship from physics and comparative law. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Now we have a change in the table. So I welcome Andrea and Sara. Sara will go first. Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
So we are expanding our analysis and our interdisciplinary dialogue to anthropology. And we have now Sara Heyazi, who is affiliated both to our university and to the Bruno Kessler Foundation. And her speech is about human and things, the end of a love story, an anthropological perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the floor. And so I will refer to Richard's speech. He was zooming in nanoparticles and molecules and then zooming out in the universe. But let's face it, we are humans. So I will zoom and adopt the perspective of humans, because this is what I do. Anthropologists will take you back to what we really are. That is the beings that are limited by time and space, and that are limited by the way that their bodies and their cultures actually impact their behavior. So human and things, a love story. Why would I ever wanted to put this title, A Love Story? Well, because I think that all of us in some way have loved things. We all love things. We love the things that surround us. For example, some of us love objects, love cars, love money. They love other people. They love their cats. They love their dogs. I mean, we always share some kind of worship of things. But is it something that is have we always loved things? Have we always been in love with our things? Let me go. Oh, no, it doesn't work, sorry. So to answer to this question, actually, well, of course, you already know the answer is yes. We evolved through a kind of special relationship with things. But to understand it better, I will adopt a theory from Daniel Dennett, a philosopher and a cognitive scientist. So he's an evolutionist. So of course, the perspective is very evolutionary. Anyway, so we always love things because we attribute an intentionality and an agency to things. So this is what we do. This is what we have always been doing. Not only Homo sapiens, actually, but even other species, for example, the Neanderthal species and the Naledi Homo and even the Denisovian have now showed evidence that they were attributing some kind of agency and intentionality to things. Why did they do this? Well, because we evolved by developing this capability of telling the intentions of others. And then as a byproduct of this evolution, we also attributed some intentions and some power of agency to things. So this is why, for example, a mountain looked sacred and maybe it had some kind of power over our lives. And this is also why, for example, we describe agency through arts, of course, also not only arts in silicon, like Richard was pointing out what they do in the S&D Center, but also art in somehow making objects talk to us and also influence our lives. This statue, for example, is very, very small, is this big. It was found in Balzi Rossi. It's a archaeological cave between the French Riviera and the Italian Riviera. And for example, it's 40,000 years old. It shows how, some kind of meaning as like fertility, for example, was attributed to the small object because it had an agency. And then, of course, throughout history, we always attributed agency in many ways, not only fairy tales, not only Harry Potter that you see now, but I mean, everything around us looks like humans. I mean, we think that everything looks like us because we are able to scale. We saw it. We saw how we are able to look at things at the very nano level, and then at the very universal level. But then again, I mean, we do anthropomorphize the universe and the world, okay? If we exit science, then what we do is basically we give what surrounds us some kind of similarity to ourselves. And this is, we go here to the birth of religions. We are hosted by the Religious Center of the Bruno Kessler Foundation. So here we have to say something also about religious belief. Not only things resemble ourselves, but even gods look like us. For example, see the goddess Kali, she has the typical features of a very powerful woman. She has the power to give birth, but also the power of destruction. And then again, for example, the Zoroastrians, they worship fire, and this fire has power of continuing, for example, life and giving and being benevolent to the worshippers of fire. There's one thing that we have to notice. How can we attribute some kind of intentionality and agency to things? How does the process work? Basically, it works through a very simple aspect. We share a belief, okay? So we agree, a community agrees that that mountain, that God, that object has some kind of agency, okay? So we do not really get anything from that thing. We do not get anything back. We attribute intention and agency, and that's it. We do it because it's a shared system of belief, but we don't expect really anything back. So nobody, for example, ever asked, if I go out in a temple and I pray, will this prayer somehow have an effect in real life? I mean, we do hope that, but let's face it, this doesn't really change religions. If we go and pray, nothing happens, we stay exactly the same, or situation doesn't change. It doesn't make any difference. People will still believe, okay? So this is a shared system of beliefs. So what happens though in our contemporary times when objects, they're not only given an intentionality by humans because this is the way humans work. They have an intentionality, not because they have an intentionality, I don't know, we should discuss this, but because they act as if they have intentions. They act. How do they act as if they have intentions? Well, Elena before me and Richard also before me, they pointed out some of the features of the quantum revolution. So 100 years ago, basically going through, zooming in and into the world of nanoparticles, what they discover is that materiality and matter is actually having an intention. We don't know if it has an intention, but anyway, the interaction between fields, between particles, actually is only, is not really calculable, but it's only probable, okay? So it only depends on probability. So we don't have control of it. So it has an intention, it has an agency. And then AI. So we have two features that kind of make us think that objects act as if they had an intention. Last week, I asked AI, some of my colleagues from the Department of Engineering already know, I asked AI to interpret a dream I had. I said, can you please tell me what does this mean? And I wrote and explained on all the symbols. And what I got back was exactly an interpretation of my dreams. But in some ways, AI was, ChatGPT was able to spot some of my deepest fears and some of my deepest worries that were coming out of that dream. So, the figure of a person interpreting a dream has been present throughout history. During the Persian Empire, for example, there were people that were entitled to do that, and their only job was to stay close to the emperor and interpret the dream of the emperor each morning and every day. But also, for example, think about all our attempts to have an oracle, to have previsions, like the Oracle of Delphi, no? So did AI really interpret my dream? I think it acted like it understood what was happening in my brain at the moment of sleep. So what I'm going to leave you with today is not, of course, an answer, but it's an hypothesis that I would like to discuss with you if we have time later. So what happens if the things that surround us start growing in the way they look, the way they look as intention, rich of intentions as agents, they start growing. Said better, sorry, is what if the things that surround us actually seem ever more capable of agency and of intention? So what is going to happen then? What is going to happen not at a, let's say, universal level or at a microscopic level, but to humans? So my idea is that the more we are disempowered in our agency, the more the AI and the things look empowered in their agency, the more we feel disempowered in our agency. It's like the space of agency of things, of machines grows, and the time-space agency of humans shrinks. Could this be the case? Let's look at some societal examples that can maybe help us to answer this question. For example, let's talk about political engagement, okay? So political engagement traditionally entails some kind of belief, first of all, in a political ideology. Second, it entails some kind of hope of change and some kind of practical engagement that has to do with a practical presence in the public sphere, the agora, okay? So 2024 was the year of elections for, like in the history of humanity, I think that it was the year in which most countries went voting. And this corresponds to the year in which voters participated less to the elections. This is just the Italian case, but I can tell you also some other cases around the world. So if you look at it, for example, the participation in Italy to the political elections was 98% in 1950, and then it progressively went down until 60% more or less of voters in 2024. Okay. It's not only about a participation of politics and in the public sphere, but also an idea that everything is guided and controlled by machines and by technology, which in a sort of way resembles a feeling of disempowerment by. So is our time-space action actually shrinking because we gave a lot of agency and intentionality to machines? There was a nice book by Miguel Benassayag that was published in 2017. It was called The Augmented Brain and the Diminished Human. So to the thesis of Benassayag, a philosopher and also cognitive science, he basically stated that the more we advance in our technologies and the less intelligent we become, okay? So how does he actually prove this? I mean, it was an intriguing thesis, but how does he prove it? Well, he does different, of course, different examples, but one that was very brief and interesting to mention today is, for example, the introduction of the GPS among taxi drivers in London. So before the introduction of GPS for taxi drivers had this big capability of being able to go anywhere in the space of the city from one point to the other with, of course, only using their memory and their sense of orientation. Years after the introduction of the GPS, this ability would disappear completely. They would get lost without the help of the machine. Okay, so this side of our life of things is getting big, it's getting important, it gives you answers about your dreams, and at the same time, maybe we are becoming disempowered and hopeless. I don't know, I have a pessimistic maybe outlook, but we can discuss. Okay, so this I will finish with a meme that my friend sent me the other day. It's in Italian, so it says, "They gave me a GPS for over 40s. It doesn't only tell me the way to get, but it also tells me why I'm going there." So it reminds me also of the reason, because actually I forgot about it. So I don't really know why I'm getting there. Not only I don't know the way. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sara. You can also sit here too. And say why. And now the word to the promoter of this symposium and the sponsor. Morally, if it's not
you are the sponsor.
Morally, if not economically. So Andrea Pradi will speak about human and things and the law.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So I'm sorry, I normally don't use slides, and after 3 speeches with the wonderful pictures there, you will see only this F on my back, because I'll do the same now. I will not use slides. I just prepare a couple of line on to how to see how human and things in the relationship between human and things, the law matters or not. We will see on this. I just want to tell you this. During the preparation, during our pleasantly discussion in preparation of the conference, with colleagues and friends in preparing the draft of the proposal, in arranging the flyer, I realized that the word things and object were often used in an equivalent manner. Nothing strange, in fact. Given that the everyday language, thing and object are synonymous. However, the etymological roots reveal a deeper distinction that has profound cultural implication. Understanding this difference allows us to appreciate varying conceptual frameworks that these words involve. particularly in the historical and in philosophical context. The word things has a rich etymological history that highlights both its material and its relational nature. It's originated from the Old English word thing, meaning a meeting, an assembly, or a council where important matters were discussed. The terms evolved from the Proto-Germanic binga, which also referred to a gathering or topic of debate. Over time, things shifted from describing these matters of discussion to referring the concrete items involved, expanding its scope to include both tangible and intangible. It's very easy to make a parallelism with the Italian word cosa, which is the contraction of the Latin word causa, initially referred to a legal or political issue under debate. Also in English, we make a cause of action. Gradually, cosa took on a more material sense, referring not only to the issue being deliberated, but also to the physical entities that is at stake, without losing its connection to human agency and decision. Both things and cosa suggest that they are not just isolated, passive objects in the world. They are filled with meaning precisely because they exist in relation to human concerns and human purpose. On the other hand, the term subject comes from the old French object, itself from the Latin objectum, meaning something that is thrown before or something presented to my mind. Its root of against and iacere, to throw, suggests that the entity to the relational and situational context, the entity that stands before us as an obstacle, as an impedimentum. So unlike thing, which is tied to the relational situation and context, objectum emphasizes a static, often oppositional relationship between the receiver and the perceiver and the perceived, representing a separate, discrete entity. What we learn from this, from the etymological development of thing and object has played a significant role in shaping the relationship between humans and the natural world. Ancient culture worldwide sought to understand the universal root of all things, linking this to the concept of a world as a cosmos, an harmonious and orderly structure regarded as a living being, as a concept of, in this view, every part of the nature, whether animate or inanimate, had an intrinsic purpose, contributing to balanced functioning of the whole. Things were not seen as isolated objects, but as an element within an network of relationship, guiding life according to the spontaneous and natural tied to human existence and perception. Okay, this understanding emphasized that things are embedded in a larger, meaningful whole, where human life constantly interacts with the external world. Ancient culture believed that all parts of the cosmos serve a purpose within a greater order, guiding life according to spontaneous and natural rhythm of this cosmic harmony. In contrast, the notion of object took prominence in the Cartesian thought, which distinguished between the realms of human thought, the res cogitans, and the material substance, the rex extens. In this framework, the object is something separate from the subject, often undressed of relationship qualities and reduced to a mere entity to be studied, manipulated, and or used. This view reflects a sharp division between the perceiver and the world, where objects are seen as isolated phenomena detached from the human involvement. Objects are present before the subject, often in opposition, requiring confrontation for the subject's self-realization, which may involve overcoming or dominating the subject. How much? Thank you. Okay. I don't wanna lose the copy, but yeah. So this epistemological journey mirrors significant historical and cultural shift in how we understand the world. The transition from things to objects reflect a broader change in the Western thought, where the world shifted from being seen as an interconnected whole to one more simple, where entities are understood as a separate, analyzable, and controllable. Western scholars began to view the world as a collection of distinct parts, governed by natural law and subject to individual reason. This shift is emblematic of the scientific revolution, which introduced a mechanistic worldview that privileged objects as isolated phenomena over things as interconnected components of the human experience. This new vision, that's now it's all, of course, but this new vision reinforced the division between the observer, the human, and the observed, the thing. The fundamental transformation of science show outstanding parallels with the evolution in the Western legal thought. The separation of human and thing is the conceptual device that enable jurists to transpose into the institutional framework of modernity the positivistic vision largely derived from Cartesian. The transition to modernity saw legal scholars actively involved in the creation of institutions that facilitate the transition of things into objects, over which humans could exercise their will. Just as science sought to explain the natural world through clear rational law, the legal system sought to impose an order to a complex system of feudal rights over land by design a simple and coherent unique model. Legal humanism laid down the intellectual groundwork for this radical shift, which marked the evolution from informal pluralistic legal institution to a formalized legal notion of private property. Described as the absolute dominion of the individual over things, that became the foundational concept that fragmented the whole into separate components, each subject to the individual free will. This notion fundamentally reshaped the legal landscape by establishing a direct and challenge like between the individual and the material world. At the dawn of modernity, the Cartesian vision of the world became predominant with the triumph of the French Revolution, which it consumed around the liberation of the land from a multitude of feudal privilege or feudal rights. The rationale of the legal system gave rise to a simplified property paradigm, famously described some years later by Sir William Blackstone in his commentaries of the laws of England as a sole and despotic dominion which one man claims and exercise over the external thing in total exclusion of the right of any other individual in the universe. This is the description of Blackstone. This paradigm, the proprietarian paradigm, found its political and moral justification in the natural law thought, which promoted an entire naturalistic vision of the social order built around a conception of private property strictly linked to labor and production. According to this view, the human being endowed by a body by nature modify the natural world throughout labor, transforming it and producing things, or better, producing objects. Property, therefore, was reward for this effort. This is pretty much the Lockean thought about it. This idea established the core of the constitutionally from the 18th century onward. As a fundamental natural right, private property has been built as a corollary of individual freedom. It was believed that owning a thing was the external manifestation of the right a person holds over his own body. Through this identification, private property was radically simplified. It detached itself from the material complexity of the things of the world and took refuge in the personal will of the individual. The physical boundaries of the things has been isolated from any other external interference and grant to the owner full decision-making power over them. This isolation creates a zone of individual sovereignty, serving not only as the most effective barrier against state power, but also as a necessary precondition for any organized society. At the technical level, constitutional statement, this constitutional statement has been translated with a simplified assumption, the consideration of the fragmented feudal rights into a single compact proprietary form, which align the legal boundaries with the physical boundaries of the thing itself. Once you possess the thing, you possess all the rights that are related to this, okay? Article 544 of the Code Napoleon established as an absolute and exclusive relationship between a single individual and a single thing as the only form of property in the whole legal system, ensuring so clarity and coherence to the system that before it was being looked at as a chaotic, you know, the feudal system was looking like a mess. A century, but the job was finished. A century later, the German scholars, the Pandestists, they cleaned the French concept from some further feudal incrustation. The Pandestist school of law made property the true model of the so-called absolute subjective rights. Free and unaltered property because a complete and rigorous legal model and the substance of any organizational structure of social life. The solo despotic dominion went to be a symbol of the anthropology of an individualized subject absolutely capable of self-determination in the full and unlimited exploitation of the things outside. Human went to be the sovereign on a small portion of the world where separate from all the others, can exercise the power over his own things fully and utterly. The naturalistic idea, tell me, fine, okay. The naturalistic idea of property found a fertile ground in the constitutional discourse at the American frontier, of course. But the notion of property rights, in plural, in which seen as a framework for creating efficient economic and social order, gained momentum in the US legal system through the economic analysis of the law. This perspective became prominent during the second half of the 20th century, when economists increasingly influenced the US legal law. Based on this, the law and economics approach imported in their discourse the simple natural rights framework to give individuals incentive to negotiate over resources allocation. Property rights became the technological backbone of the market, transforming many situations into commodities easily exchangeable in the market. This shift allowed things to be viewed primarily in terms of they transform things from object to the value exchange market. The thing is only a value that should be exchanged in the market. The simplicity of the property rights paradigm led to its widespread global success. Its adaptability across different legal systems facilitates its diffusion, allowed it to transcend the very different property structure that the different system has. Privatization and structural reform driven by global governance institutions further entrench the property rights paradigm as the primary legal framework for managing the global economy and society. This expansion extended property rights to an area such as air, water, genomes, knowledge, culture, new resources integrated into the market logic, often without considering their specific nature or the local social context. Example of this approach include pollution rights established by the Kyoto Protocol, which commodified air, basically, or the privatization of water, and others. However, it has been the technological revolution that provides fertile ground for the experimentation and the expansion of the property model. With the rise of digital technology and the internet, property increasingly shifted from material to immaterial and then to intangible world. Intellectual property rights, for example, govern ownership on ideas, invention in digital creations such as software, music, and digital art. This intangible access, unlike physical goods, can be both sold and licensed without physical transfer. Bitcoin further illustrates this shift. They exist only as a digital records and represent ownership of digital assets without the need of the physical possession. The application of this proprietary model to the digital world has justified the massive expansion of intellectual property rights, but it has also raised significant challenges. Rapid technological progress continuously questions the functionality of the individual property paradigm. Consider, for instance, issues surrounding patenting of gene and genetically modified organisms, which impact healthcare access and scientific research, or concern over big data collection and individual privacy. Question about the ownership of algorithms, data, and AI-generated works further complicate the idea of individual property in a digital age. However, apply economics logic to property law on a digital scale introduce significant risk. One key concern is that it reinforces conservative tendency against wealth distribution, prioritizing individual wealth accumulation over social equality. By focusing on exclusively on an economic efficiency, this approach often disregards communitarian values, such as shared resources or collective ownership, which are vital for social fairness and environmental justice. These risks are particularly evident when property law is applied to human relationships, which cannot be reduced to market transactions. Human interaction involves emotion, involve cultural value and social bonds that are extend beyond ownership and exchange. Reducing this complexity to economics logic undermine their deeper significance and role in the social fabric. A second problem, and I'm going to finish, so we can the continued attempt to transfer decision-making power into the digital realm risk to weakening the very institution of property itself. In the age of big data, the Internet of Things, blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, decision-making is increasingly delegated to technological systems and basically to the owner of the technology, of course. Who doesn't see today how our direction in the world, Sarah just called the example of the GPS. So who doesn't see today how our direction in the world is guided by a GPS? How our consume are driven by the social media, for example. How we entrust more and more on our financial investment to blockchain operating in Bitcoin. How we put the production of our thought and decision into the black box of AI or ChatGPT that Professor Monte used normally. Now, this shift, but to use this device, we have to accept a series of conditions as well as to pay for it. So this shift disrupts traditional legal theory and practice by the reduced the zone of human autonomy more and more. As production becomes substantially virtual with AI and digital technology generation, new creation, human control over things become less effective. In this digital realm, property becomes abstract and difficult to enforce. And AI generator output challenge traditional notion of property since they are product by algorithm and not the human form. As we approach the frontier to internet, a new social order is emerging, in which decentralized human decision-making over resources is increasingly replaced by the centralized control over them. What we learn from this? As we in defining property law, things matter. The nature define the utility the owner can drive the real from them, not the other way around. And there are things to set the limits on what the owner can do. By now, jurists have jealously maintained a view over property as a legal concept to be kept separate from the natural and material condition of life to such an extent that few of those who today consider the unequal distribution of resources or the environmental disaster as a matter that has to do with the legal nature of property. In science, now we are experiencing a paradigm shift brought about by the quantum turn in physics that involve a fundamental change of method, from seeing the world as a machine to understanding it as a network. Human and things are deeply interconnected and influence each other. For this reason, the law of property should be a co-production and an integral process that involves both human and things. Property right couldn't be seen as all despotic dominion, but should carry also the social and the ecological obligation to preserve the real nature of the thing in the interest of the community toward the future generation. Maybe it's good to follow what the quantum revolution is suggesting us, because here a risk is the extinction of our very existence as humans, even before the one of them. Thank you very much. And
Thank you, Andrea. So I believe we can now have a break and rejoin in 15, 20 minutes.
I think it's a half an hour, but it's
Okay. Okay, we can go ahead. Okay. So now we have Caroline Johnson from the Center for Sensor and Devices of Bruno Kessler Foundation, who will be talking to us about the Anthropocene evidence we are human doings and not human beings.
Yep, okay. So yes, as just said, my name is Caroline Johnson and I work for the Bruno Kessler Foundation with the Center of Sensors and Devices. And I'm going to talk to you today about the Anthropocene and the evidence that we are human doings, not human beings, and how a co-production model can explain the evolution of humans and science. As a precursor, though, I just wanted to explain why I'm here, because if you Google me or look on the Bruno Kessler, like my phone book, whatever, I'm a project manager. I am not an active researcher. And the reason I'm here is I did used to be a researcher. I'm a geologist, as Richard introduced me before, and I actually still sometimes occasionally work as a geologist, specifically exploration geology. But I also have personal interests, which I have studied in yoga and philosophy, language, and spiritual naturalism, which is more of a personal thing than something I've studied per se. And these elements of my broader interest range, as well as my expertise, are woven into this talk. But yes, I am a project manager. And I've made a little map of places I've worked and lived. And just to give some context, that I'm an international, you can probably hear from my accent. But also that working in these very different environments across 5 continents has provided me with cultural insight that is itself an education, albeit not in a classroom. So I was very grateful to be invited by Zara, thank you, to give a talk. And when she sat me down, she said, I would love it if you would talk on the Anthropocene and humans. And I was like, sure, great, I'll do that. And I wrote a very impassioned abstract. I don't know whether some of you have read it, and was very like reflective on the bigger picture, and was absolutely determined that we would talk about the Anthropocene. And then all of a few days ago, when I started to really nail out the presentation, the slides, I found that in March of this year, Nature has released its formal, like it's been in council, and I didn't know it was in discussion for 15 years, the Anthropocene as terminology, and it's been debunked. It's been pulled out of strictly per se geological terminology, but because of its adoption and wide use already across many fields of academia, and you can see here in the, this is the Nature publication cover, where it says the concept is used by researchers in natural sciences, engineering, humanities, and social sciences. The term is still true to its meaning. We just don't use it in the geological record anymore. So I just wanted to explain that before everyone runs off, and it's like we had this geologist talking to us about the Anthropocene and some people saying like she shouldn't be doing that. And just to sort of adhere to like what they did decide, or how they were going to explain it, or have decided to explain it, their decision making, is the debate started 15 years ago. And although it's acknowledged and recognized that humans have had a huge impact on the planet, they're choosing to, or it's viewed as being more comparable with something like the snowball Earth, which is, if I was going to use like movie analogies, it's like the end of Ice Age is the end of snowball Earth, which is a period of geological time. Or meteorite impact wiping out dinosaurs, Jurassic Park. So like we're like an event at the moment. This is because we haven't actually been here very long, as we're about to see. So this is what the Anthropocene is used to describe now, this event of humans coming to be, human beings coming to be. So the Earth and humans, a timeline, I think, is it gonna let me, does it let me? Oh yes, right. So Homo sapiens, that's human beings. And we've been around, we evolved 300,000 years ago. But interestingly, it took us 100,000 years to become cognitively and behaviorally adapt to be true human beings, Homo sapiens. And that's really around the discourse of language and communication and tribal grouping and movement. And the other the controversy of Anthropocene continues is that there isn't a general consensus on when it started. So geologists look at it as being maybe 50, well, we did look at it as being about 15,000 years ago at the end of the Pleistocene, but as it's come into its use of the impact humans have had on the Earth, some people consider the 1960s when we first had the full front of things like acid rain, the awareness, like the documentation and acceptance of carbon dioxide emissions increasing and the relationship of that with the Industrial Revolution. That it was the point of realization that some people consider the Anthropocene to be the starting point. Regardless, in terms of the timeline, it's a very, very, very recent event, us being here, in terms of the Earth's history, which started 4.6 billion years ago. And I got some pictures of some skulls, and this is what the evolutionary timeline, like progression, looks like of us to where we are now. So, Homo sapiens. So, like I said, there are many strands, elements in this talk. Language is one of them. And I really liked it when somebody talked about the etymology of things and objects. And there's a little bit of etymology consideration given here in this talk around what Homo sapiens actually means as a term. Homo is not obviously man, technically a male human, but in logical and scholastic writing, we consider it human being, hence the talk. And sapiens is from sapere, to be wise, to be of knowledge. And I found it really interesting because the talk has some conflicts in it, as you'll see, of the view of humans and the Earth, that we have this name, which is really quite noble, around this idea that we are wise and knowledgeable and like a gift to the planet. And yet actually the planet is a gift to us, and we're not doing as great a job with it as we might think we are. And it seems a contradiction that we are these this knowing man, like the apex of evolution, and yet we're the most destructive thing to be present on the planet. So how it all started. So when Homo sapiens came to be, there was a period where the species had to to determine itself to get up and going, for want of a better word, like to produce enough to stabilize and then to proliferate. And the basic needs of the requirements for that to be successful, to be achieved, I put it in relation to the Maslow's pyramid, or a hierarchy of needs, but we were really operating, Homo sapiens were really operating at the base of the pyramid. And they made these little shelters called terra amatas. They made tools, which we're going to look at in a minute. Tools were incredibly important. And then we needed resources, water being the main resource at that point we needed. And fire also played a huge role in the success of our establishment as a species and our evolution. I wanted, and it's just an accent on this page, that humans' motivations to understand the Earth have evolved as we have evolved over time. And at this stage, the beginning of Homo sapiens establishment, the interest in the planet was exploitation and resource needs. That's food, water, shelter, everything to maintain basic life requirements. However, as we have evolved and developed, we see sort of, from times of sort of 12,000 onward, maybe even before, you could say, I mean, someone like Sarah would be much more informed of the precise date, but we also have wonder and awe of understanding the surroundings, what surrounds us, like volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis and sunsets. Like, there's a beautiful curiosity we have about the Earth, but increasingly in modern times, our desire to understand the Earth revolves around crisis management of crises that we're going to see we have formed, and risk mitigation to try and stop any more coming to cause us problems of us experiencing negative impacts. So back to these tools, and the reason the tools are quite interesting, going to go as far as saying exciting, is the modes of tools of Homo sapiens that permitted our survival, or for hunter-gathering and making shelters, are actually the first record of technology in human history. So, we often think, oh, the Industrial Revolution, like first Industrial Revolution, 1790, it's when it all began. It didn't. It began 6 million years ago with the very earliest Homo sapiens finding what I can only describe as a lucky pebble, because to begin with, they didn't know how to make and cut rocks into things, and they were just looking for the thing that was the most useful for what their need was. And slowly, and when I say slowly, I mean over 6 million years, it took 6 million years for us to go from fist-sized lucky cobbles and pebbles to really intricate, it's called, I believe it's pronounced napping, the art of cutting stones into arrowheads. And they went from being these 3D fist objects to bifacial objects to prismoidal objects, became more complex. And we also see that things go from being big to small, and then big again to small. So we use at scale to refine our technique. And then when we're confident, we become more precise. And we still use that model now. So I listed out, I'm a great one for detail and information, mainly for myself, actually, if I'm honest, the 5 modes, and this took 6 million years to achieve, from this to this. And yet in 350 years, we've gone from coal and steam engines to smart working and Internet of Things and AI and ML, artificial intelligence and machine learning, scientific revolutions, 5 revolutions in 350, years, which is just incredible. So when we look at those scales and the contrast, one, there's way more of us now than there were then. There's 8.2 billion people as of today or this week on the planet, and back when they started, it was, you know, obviously one proliferating, but this point is about thousands. But we're also capable now of doing more and faster. And here, I think it's important to recognize that whether it's this evolution of our ability to do, to make, to create, or this series of revolutions here, both of them are five modes, 5 revolutions. The driver for technology in both these scenarios is the progress of the species to survival and dominance. So we look at that a little bit more. Oh, we come on to language. Skip back to language, and it comes into context. So this was a Nature paper, and I found it fascinating that they did a study. I actually found it fascinating that it made it into Nature because it was such an obscure study. But they took a group of people, and they there were 30 of them, and they were put into an experiment with Anapa, who is a modern day stone carver, and he replicated to demonstrate, to teach them how to make arrowheads, like these small little flint pieces. And they were put into 3 groups, and the first group, no language. The communication of teaching method was purely imitation and emulation. So there was no, they just watched, purely watched, and then they copied. And then the second group, there was gestural communication. So like Anapa was not saying any words, but he was trying to show them and guide them in what he was doing. The communication was physical. And then the third group was with verbal communication. And as you might or may not expect, but the verbal communication group came out with like far greater progress in their ability to work with the stones and make the arrowheads. And the poorest development was seen in the imitation group, which is part of what makes us special as human beings, Homo sapiens, is our development, cognitive development and ability to communicate to the point of speech and dialogue, interchange, because that with dialogue came the ability to increase our rate of progress and success and survival in our groups. On a more literal note, I wanted to consider what being means. And I've looked at it really only in these 2 forms. Like, it's also an adjective and a conjunction, but they're not really relevant to this talk. But in terms of being as a noun, which is where the name human being comes from, we have the quality or the state of existence, something that exists, conscious existence. And that's important, this idea of consciousness being associated with being. There are also the sort of simpler ideas of something living, but we are obviously alive. But in terms of the human being context, it's the idea of conscious existence is something I'd like us to hold on to as we progress through this talk. There's also the verb form, to be, obviously, to be or not to be, as this is. And to be is obviously I am, you are, he is, she is, we are, so on and so forth. And there's this idea that I think, therefore I am. And again, there's this reflection even in our language that we recognize that our ability to think, our cognitive function, is part of what makes us being. So I gave some examples of the use of be as the verb. And what I found really interesting is when they're paired either with the verb, continuous present, an adjective, preposition, or a noun. We only see one where we really look at state of being, whereas the other forms, we're generally looking at activity or function or action. And these are all to do with doing, this idea that we intrinsically being, part of being is doing. So being is both a state and doing, and you can have both simultaneously. And I think language is important to consider because language, it becomes subliminal programming for the human brain. What we listen to, what we hear, we end up emanating and literally being. So that's the note on that. Then I wanted to look at things. What are things? I thought that was important because I came at it very materialistically, like objects and physical things. And then I did the legendary Googles, like images for the presentation. And I found like all these other ideas around what constitutes a thing. And actually really anything can be a thing. I mean, it's even in the word. But what I'd like us to hone in on, and like what I want to focus on today, is really tangible, physical objects is what I'm going to be talking about in this talk. Human-made objects. Objects, things that require thought, resources, and tools to make. What I did love, though, when I found this, was there was a book called Things to Do When You're Bored. And considering the idea of this talk is that we are not capable of being any longer and we're obsessed with doing, I just thought it was fantastic that there was a book called Things to Do. So moving on back to the geology side of things, Earth resource. So when we go back 6 million years to 300,000 years, 200,000 years, any resources are these very primitive, you know, what they can catch, what they, you know, a twig, a stone. And it's not until we progress to around 10,000 years ago when we see humans' first interaction with metals. So this is metals in rocks and making use of them. And to begin with, this is the modern day value chain for ore processing. So from finding the rock with metal in it to recycling the metal after it's been through a production process and made something that's been thrown away. Very early on in the beginning, before we had processing, this was 10,000 years ago. So this is like, they found the metal, they were able to extract it, and they were able to do a basic form of smelting. And then it took another 6,500 years before we were able to create alloys, which is when we mix metals to give combined qualities to make things. And then we come all the way to present day, and we now have this explosion of ability to do this en masse at scale. And this comes in 1790, when we see the first industrial revolution, when we were able to ramp up, move further, produce more. We became more efficient. We had engines. So there are three main domains of resources on Earth. There's the mining, minerals and metals. We have oil and gas and water. And actually you need all three of these to be able to do mining. You can't do mining without gas or oil, and you definitely need water. Making things, so this is a form of doing, getting the metals out of the ground. Making things requires a lot of doing. There's a lot of stages. There's a lot of people involved. And of course, there's also trading. And trade, you'll see, also is an important part of human beings' evolution, and particularly the evolution of our impact on the planet. And this is science. This is science and technology driven, this whole process. And it's a thought to create, you know, you have an idea, you try something, you do something, like the science, the research, the technology development as a phase, you create something, you have an output, and then there's a refinement process where you go back and you do it again. And there's this iterative feedback loop between the technology development, the science progress, and the human. And usually as soon as we've achieved one stage, we want the next stage. So this starts to show, is an example in this value chain of how humans and science and technology co-evolve together, influence one another. One drives the other. It's like, you know, you answer the question, you're ready with the next one. But could we do this? I've listed here, this is a slide just going over the 5 industrial revolutions. So it's at 1780, apologies, said 1790 before. So we start with mechanization, and this is very much driven by coal, an earth resource. an energy resource. And then we had 120 years later, gas and oil came online, and we were able to electrify, get things, assembly lines, energy, better energy. And this meant that we needed fewer people. We could start to do things faster with fewer people. So gas and oil, again, a resource, an earth resource. Then we have automation and the, when we really scale electrification and computer, start to computerize or automate it, we have electronics and nuclear energy comes online. With the third, then the fourth is the digitization, the internet, and the internet became like an explosion of our ability, particularly around trade and money transfer. Before then, things were done like by check. It was, you didn't, when we got the internet and we were able to move money instantaneously, trade took up a speed we have never seen before. And we also became, this is also the coincidence of aviation. And with that also, we were able to move things so much more quickly. You know, before it was on a boat across the oceans, and then it was overnight by air. Game changer, two huge game changers in our evolution, like human evolution, technological progress as society. And now this is where we're at, where it's called on this piece of personalization, which I'm intrigued by. I'm what it said. What I'd like us to point out, or like to just take note of, is the rate change of these revolutions. So the first one, the skip between the two was 120 years, and now we're down to 20 years, which would, if you're going roughly at the rate of what this is, mean that we're looking at a half-life. Basically, that means, suggests that within, this is 2020, by 2030, could we be seeing the next, the sixth industrial revolution, and what would that be? And each revolution follows on the back of the other. We leverage off the milestones, the achievements of each revolution. And what's a really interesting consideration, especially as we've proliferated and we've got power dominance, you know, strong and poor economies and individuals rise to the top with power and others don't, the majority don't, is the consideration of which humans are driving this change and what is their motivation. Because everyone's got an agenda and most of us fall in, the rest of us fall into it. So economics and the three words, oh, it doesn't come up so good now. So there was a there is this three worlds concept. Basically, it's the three worlds concept. There's the model and the theory. They're both related to the understanding of the global geopolitical division that came about from the Cold War. And I'm not going to talk about the Cold War or human beings in states of war or anything like that. We can, though, say that war has had a huge impact on the Earth. If we think of Fukushima, even nuclear testing, the remnants and the impact that has had on the planet's health and well-being and areas that are contaminated is huge. And that's not nature-made, that is 100% man-made. But there is this idea that whether it's three-world theory, three-world model, or even if we look at a more standard global north, global south, and the BRICS, the kind of emerging economies of the BRICS, there is this idea that the world generally gets split up into three on an economic parallel, like when we are doing an analysis of the powers of wealth across the world. And humans have always exchanged. We've always wanted to trade with one another. And then over time, we started to accumulate. And this is when I think things really takes off. Because it's one thing I give you something and you give me something back, but it's another thing when it's like I want a pile of things and I want a pile of things to show my status and be my wealth and to be someone and rise to the top and to have power. And then what you do with that power again. So there is evidence of long distance trade networks going back to 300,000 years, which if you remember from the first slide around Homo sapiens is about when we kicked in. Which comes back to, I think, what Zara was saying around this idea that we have placed importance on objects and identified with them attributing something of being importance, and importance exerting a force on us external to us that is of importance to us to recognize. International trade and global economics are the result of industrial technological revolutions. Said that in the last slide. Okay, nice pictures. So there was this idea, the idea that as human beings, Homo sapiens, we're part of nature's evolution, therefore we are a part of nature. And you could say, and it is accurate, I think, to say that urban environments are actually natural environments. They're then made by nature, they're made by nature, that is us. So there's this idea of distinguishing between like untouched nature and human nature. So untouched nature we call pristine nature. And I was like, oh, I want to see what AI tells me about the Earth before humans. And it didn't really tell me anything. So I looked for pictures of where there are no parts of the world where there are no human inhabitants. And this is what we could imagine a desert, a mountain, alpine environment, and a tropical environment looking like. And then we look at the world today, and it seems like this didn't exist when in the pristine environment before we came along. And now we have, this is acid mine drainage, which is a problem from ore waste when there's sulfides in the ore specifically. Hugely polluting, gets into waterways, gets into the water table, and the huge amount of research is being done to work out cleanup operations and also how to avoid it with mine sites in future. This is an oil rig explosion, an oil leak in the ocean. This is smog, deforestation, and then the plastic islands in the ocean. All completely human-made, what we see here. So this is our impact, which is incredibly sad that we've identified this need to name a period of time after our existence, and the driving force for that is because of the destruction we're doing to the planet. And here we are. So coming back to Maslow's pyramid, there's this idea of how, as we have evolved as humans, how we've risen up the pyramid, take it broadly. We all need food and water, like basic needs, back as those, the same as those at the beginning of time. Our idea around what a shelter looks like, well, this isn't a twig hut anymore. And everyone wants a car, and then, you know, an iPhone, there's a new one every year, people have turnover. And this doesn't even take into consideration what is done with what we throw away or where it goes. And clothes, you've seen pictures, I'm sure, of the clothes mountains, are fast fashion issues in society. And it seems that we're stuck at this point between esteem, self-esteem, our confidence, the respect of others, respect for ourselves and from one another. And it comes back to this idea around trade and owning things and it being status and wealth and power. And we're sort of caught in a loop of that. And rather than breaking what is apparently a glass ceiling, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, we're just caught in a loop of how can we do more, faster, better, fancier. And, you know, we say, well, we've got all this waste now, why aren't we doing more with recycling? The technology, we're not advancing technology where we need to be. So I worked in the mining industry in research, and I can tell you that it is easier, and it will be easier for decades to find a new ore deposit and mine that and process that, even process lower grade ore, which will take more work, more chemicals, than it will be to sort out rubbish and recycle parts. Particularly because a huge amount of our waste, before there was recycling and you split all your plastics and your paper and your cans, for years and years and years and years, the majority of waste out there, in fact, is organics with metals. And you cannot, even in an ore which has got a tiny, like 0.1% carbon in it from some fossils, it messes with the flocculation and you can't extract it. So if you take that and you scale it to food waste, human waste, mixed with recycled metals that we might have in landfills, separating them, it would be a nightmare. So we're going to be looking for more pristine environments to destroy or to change, to alter, to keep this loop going of wanting things and satisfying our want. I did want to mention, I'm almost at the end, that this is Maslow's hierarchy, which is often referred to in these sorts of talks. But what's really interesting that's less often referred to is Maslow hadn't actually finished his pyramid. He'd published this work, but he hadn't finished this work when he died. And when he died, he was actually still progressing the idea that this wasn't where the pyramid ended. And his work was picked up by, well, he handed over to someone called, a gentleman called Richard Barrett, who'd actually been in banking and had moved into philosophy. And he picked it up and he ran with it. And it actually turns out that with the, if you extend the ideal thinking and take it further, is that this idea of self-actualization, which is being the best service of ourselves to ourselves, the best version of ourselves, of service to ourselves and to others, is actually only about the middle of where the pyramid would be in a more philosophical, boring, spiritual space. And Richard Barrett writes, if we begin to see our psychological journey by learning to survive, and we complete the journey by learning to serve, we start our lives in ego consciousness. And if we are successful in meeting our deficiency and growth needs, we end our lives in soul consciousness. So actually self-actualization isn't even, I mean, it's the next best point for us to reach, but there's this idea that there's actually further for us as human beings to go than that. And this again comes back to this idea of status that we are so strongly externally referenced, and this is our motivation for doing more, to have more things. So self-transcendence, what will it take? So this is how it started. This is how it's going, not great. And I'd like to propose in this talk that there's a glimmer that in this glass ceiling that we don't seem able to break, that the destruction we're causing to our planet is actually going to be the motivator that gets us to fulfill the next level of self-actualization. And that is the state and impact of the planet's destruction is starting to affect us and our well-being, a fact we must accept. It is calling on our morality to resolve. It will require creativity and problem solving. And maybe this is what we need to reach self-actualization. Is Earth's destruction actually helping us with our evolution as human beings and our ascension to self-transcendence? And these bits I've highlighted are what are the descriptors in this, the self-actualization point of the pyramid. And then would that lead us up further? So the future, what does it look like? I believe it will continue to be a co-production model driven by powers, needs, interests as well. Like, can we do things better? It's great to do things better and more efficiently, our wants and our desires. But what could we do to make this feedback loop of the planet, society, and technology better? I think we need to come back to Homo sapien and think a little bit more carefully about what our role is as sapien actually is. And are we being wise with our activity at the moment, how we're choosing to present and be on the planet? I don't think so. Humanities, and echo to the broader crowd, obviously I come from a slightly more science background. But I think geology is a good straddle, actually, between science and humanities. But I think that the conversation, it doesn't just need to be this dialogue between society and science. It needs to be a multi-log between many actors. And I don't think we have all the right people sitting at the table in this discussion. And we need to revisit our wonder and awe and appreciation of the natural environment and understand that our well-being is intrinsically tied to the planet's well-being. And what do we need to remove? We need to remove our obsession with things, wanting so many things, and this finding our status and our sense of worth and how we're received and perceive ourselves to be received by others in the environment. The transcendence of ego, which if you do meditative or yogic practice, maybe might be something you've considered or reflected on yourself, but this idea to escape this stronghold of the identity with I am. And we need to remove, probably most importantly, this institutionalized traditional power hierarchy of science's knowledge that informs policy and governance that society then adheres to, and then we advance and we benefit from it, and we do it all over again, and everything just keeps getting better because it's not getting better. And this is my final closing note, and this is much more on the philosophical, borderline spiritual side of, but it's a consideration that I think has a lot of weight in the context of the idea that as human beings, our doing is actually intrinsically tied to our state, to our being. We are here to do, that's what self-actualization is. It's not just to sit in a room with thoughts and not share or give or produce anything, but it's about the importance we place on where we focus our energy. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Our being, our state of existence is intimately linked with our doing. Self-actualizing requires us to do, but it is what we do that matters. Connecting with ourselves to transcend external referencing, to place focus on our personal, authentic, internal referencing will enable us to progress, maybe even towards soul consciousness. How we connect with our internal dialogue to pursue this inquiry is personal and unique, but doing so is our gateway to being human. And that's the end of my talk.
Thank you, Caroline, for this very articulated and inspiring indeed talk. Now we'll be skipping to legal anthropology with Luca Pes, who is a professor in our law school, comparative lawyer as well, who will be presenting on land and water rights in the inner delta of the Niger River. So a different way to look at the relationship between human and things. So please, Luca, go ahead.
So thank you. This presentation is based on a forthcoming book chapter, co-authored with a colleague, anthropologist based in Norway, working in the field of political ecology. And also the book is edited by a group of social geographers. It's entitled A Flowing Condition, Living with Water and Land in the Sahel. So my contribution falls in the first half of this conference entitled Reality, although for my purpose, I would rather rename it Materiality in a rather traditional sense, because I focus on land and water as material resources in an agricultural economy. So my contribution is based on ethnographic research carried in 2016-17 in a region of central Mali. We are in West Africa, called upon its geographical denomination, the inner delta of the Niger River, or called also Masina, after the name of a pre-colonial state, which developed here in the 1800s. So try to explain also why I'm here and to connect this topic to the topic of the conference. Land and water can be considered things in the sense of being tangible elements of the material world, while rights, as I'm speaking of land and water rights, are of course social objects belonging to the normative dimension of human societies, that is the domain of law. So as the keynote put it in the opening of this session, this is the domain of the ought to be or the should be, as opposed to the domain of the is. However, to employ land and water in human productive relations, that is to turn material things into economic resources, natural resources, in this case, requires mobilization of work, which is another inherently social object rather than a thing. And this is why I prefer to adopt terminology deriving from sociology, rural sociology, but also known to property lawyers and jurisprudence, speaking of land relations rather than of land or water as objects in themselves. So the law of property is not about material objects in themselves, but is about their deployment in social relations. The area commonly known as the inner delta in Mali, in central Mali, is a very flat territory covering a substantial part of the country. It measures about 40,000 square kilometers. It's one of the biggest deltas in inner deltas in the world, inland deltas. And it's characterized by a highly dynamic and ever-changing environment, as you can see from these satellite images, where the interaction between land and water shape the landscape and the livelihood of the people inhabiting this territory. So from an ecological point of view, the most prominent feature of this territory is its seasonal flooding cycle. So during the rainy season, which typically occurs between May and November, heavy rainfall in the upper basin of the Niger River in Guinea causes the Niger and the Bani River, the most important affluent in this area, to swell, overflowing their banks, inundating the floodplains. So this flooding transforms the delta into an expansive wetland covering vast areas with water, creating a mosaic of channels, lakes, marshes. And as the dry season progresses, water levels gradually recede, exposing fertile soils and allowing livestock grazing and agriculture to take place. So this is a fluid landscape for two reasons. One, it is dominated by water, so being the fluid substance per excellence. And secondly, the main natural resources employed in productive relations, land and water, are constantly shifting. So spaces like fishable waters and grazing land and farming land have no fixed and stable consistency. So despite the Western and developmentalist jargon of natural resources, for the people living in this region, land and water are far from being objects of a natural world out there. First of all, because as I said, their exploitation requires the mobilization of work, which is an inherently social object rather than a thing, involving the subjective dimension of relations among people. And this is a fact particularly evident in societies with low intake of technology. You need a lot of people to mobilize a lot of work to run a productive system, an agricultural economy. Secondly, farmland, why these are not natural resources? Farmland, grassland, fishable waters do not belong to the same kind of objects as the term resource implies in Western economic discourse, because they represent a symbolic dimension in social relation. So this fact emerges with particular vigor in the domain of political relations, where the control of land and water stands as the symbol of legitimate authority. And also in the religious sphere, where land and water are imagined as containing invisible forces, jinns, ancestors, genies of the bush. So from this perspective, land and water represent sacred objects and the means of access to the supernatural world. So in this social and ecological landscape of the inner delta, land and water can be described as fluid objects, not fixable in any permanent way in space and time. And the authority of the customary chiefs over such resources, and more generally, the overall legal order that I'm setting out to explain, take a correspondingly fluid character. So historically, there are three figures of customary chiefs that have been central to the control of land and water in this region. Far from being remnants of the past, these customary chiefs proved to be extremely resilient institutions that over time adapted to successive forms of political domination, from the pre-colonial state of Massina, which I mentioned in the 18th century, through the French colonization to present-day independent Mali. The first among these customary chiefs is the land chief in farming communities, growing mainly dry crops, millet, maize, and sorghum, so after the floods, or flooded crops, such as rice. The denomination of this chief translates as the master of the skeleton of the village, signaling the relevance of farming as the material basis of the very existence of the community. And his office normally coincides with that of village chief, that is the head of the village community in a political sense. And at the same time, he's also the master of the sacrificial practices, honoring the sacred pact between the first settlers and the genius of the bush, on which the community is founded. Sacrifices ensure fertility of land and protect it from drought, harmful rains, and attack by crop-destroying insects. Now, over time, under the political domination of this pre-colonial empire state of Massina, this chief lost some of their land controlling power to the advantage of another kind of land chiefs called Joro. I don't go into details, but the ruler of this pre-colonial state had divided the territory of the inner delta into agro-pastoral units by appointing noblemen from the sedentary communities in the inner delta as local authorities responsible for the distribution of both pastoral and farming land. And significantly for the future development of land relations in the locality, this aristocracy comprised of literate men claiming direct descent from the prophet, so they were sharifs. Then concerning the cattle herding communities, there is another figure of customary chief called the master of the transhumance path, an institution typical of semi-nomadic communities, an elderman leading the group of cattle herders at the start of transhumance. And this chief possesses detailed knowledge of both spatial and social transhumance path and corridors. Is also the minister of sacrifices, necessary for the opening of transhumance and renewing the pact with the ancestors. And as a master of the bush, his knowledge includes the fauna and the flora, as well as the invisible forces populating the bushland. So it protects the herders and their cattle from wild animals by leading them to safe corridors, rich in grass and water. And finally, among the fishing communities, so there is an interaction in this area between these three kinds of communities, farming, fishing, and herding. The control of water and the distribution of fishing rights are the responsibilities of a third authority called the Jitigi, Master of Waters, which corresponds to the other customary chiefs. Is an elder representative of a community practicing fishing, credited with knowledge both about territorial and social boundaries of such and economic activity in the inner delta. So its powers include the negotiation of the relationships with the neighboring communities, the distribution of fishing rights, both within the community and among foreigners who can be hosted, that is allowed to fish in varying numbers depending on the season and on the level of the flood. So similar to the other authorities, the master of water also plays an intermediary role between the visible and the invisible forces inhabiting the river. So overall, the legitimacy of these customary chiefs lies in a kind of holistic knowledge of both the material and the mystical words. In fact, chiefs are called to master intertwining dimensions of social relations involving the management of natural resources, so the domain of ecology, the relationship with other groups, politics, and the settlement of dispute, so law. In this respect, land and water must be understood as hybrid set of rules, land and water rights, not confined to the settlement of disputes, but extending to ecological, mystical, and sociopolitical knowledge. The authority of these customary chiefs is substantiated in their exercise of two main powers. On the one hand, they are in charge of the distribution of rights held collectively by the community to the various descent-based subgroups and eventually to foreigners, so groups sensed as not permanently bonded to the community, mainly on the premise of descending from a common ancestor. And the other power of customary chiefs is to impose monetary fees in return for the exercise of such rights, especially when these rights are allocated outside the community. Now, what happens when this system of customary authorities, I wouldn't even say law, but customary authorities, encounters the bureaucratized system of the administration of justice run by the national state? So in Mali, in a country like Mali, state judges are well skilled in balancing their power to enforce positive law with a seemingly conciliatory attitude aimed at convincing the social milieu of the parties that a decision is mutually beneficial to them, representing at least an acceptable solution. Should these judges fail to adopt such a pragmatic attitude, their judgments are likely to remain dead letter at best, or to constitute the premise for the resurgence of the conflict over time, or even its enlargement to wider communities. In an interview held in January 2017 in these headquarters in the regional capital of Djenné, the judge of first instance emphasized in these terms the hybrid nature of the judicial decision-making process, typically occurring in land-related matters. In land disputes, there are situations where the parties ask to swear on the Quran or to go and drink water from a sacred pond. If you swear on these types of things, it is assumed that the liar dies. It does not matter whether the water of the pond kills or not. This is not the important point. But psychologically, the person who is wrong will not agree to drink the water from the sacred pond. Custom, therefore, allows the truth to be revealed. The law recognizes the custom of the parties, so it is the custom of the parties that I am enforcing by adopting this practice. So on the one hand, the judge acknowledges the existence of customary mechanisms of discovery overlapping with state-sponsored rules of judicial procedure and the need to take these into account to reach an effective decision. And on the other hand, the judge adopts a pragmatic attitude toward customary authorities exerting their influence on the dispute. He knows that if he wants a decision to be endowed with some effectiveness, he will have to face traditional leaders and notables. And in fact, judges will normally convene these authorities as witnesses, knowing the custom of the parties, with the aim to find a concerted decision. So in this respect, the resolution of land dispute requires negotiations between different and at times conflicting legal orders, such as national state law, the vestiges of Islamic law, and local community rules in which in legal jargon are rendered as the custom of the parties. And mediation processes are crucial in preliminary phases of the trial. When judges are called to settle on a dispute, the first action they will take is to refer the parties to an out-of-court authority that may help the parties to find a negotiated solution. And while in other parts of Mali, such negotiations take place in front of the village chief, in the regional capital, Jenne, people are invited to turn to a body called the High Islamic Council. And while this attitude by the judge may be misinterpreted as the judge's attempt to get rid of the case, it actually constitutes the first effort to ground an eventual judicial settlement of the dispute into the societal milieu of the parties by acknowledging that any non-negotiated decision made solely on the basis of state law would break up community ties. And this caution finds a special justification in the field of land relations, where disputes touch on material and symbolic resources crucial for defining the relationship between groups. The underlying idea of justice is one aiming at compensating and reconciling the parties to restore the dignity of each of them while maintaining a common sense of legitimate political order. So now, if the parties find a negotiated solution in front of the Islamic Council, the latter will draft a written minutes of the agreement, send it to the judge in a somewhat more bureaucratized fashion compared to other parts of Mali. Then the judge will convene a public hearing in order to validate the agreement, make it publicly accepted. And in fact, the hearing will be attended by a number of witnesses, including the customary chiefs of land, of transhumance and water, depending on the subject of the dispute and on the communities involved. In case this negotiation turns to be unsuccessful, the judge is expected to directly investigate the case by hearing testimonies, taking over other means of evidence. But even in this case, some external Islamic scholars are likely to be involved in the decision. And these characters are called al-Qali, possible distortion of the Arabic term Qadi, which stands for judge or lawyer or notary, it depends. These are literate men, normally members of the local Islamic Council, in charge of ascertaining the validity of some documents called tariqs, literally meaning narrative or history in Arabic. A tariq is a written document issued by an Islamic scholar, Qadi, expressing a judicial decision or attesting the legality of a transaction. So in the inner delta, a tariq is frequently employed as some sort of land certificate, becoming a central piece of evidence in land disputes when it is necessary to document the chain of passages of certain rights over time. So in practice, a tariq is something less than a land title, which requires a huge administrative apparatus, mapping the land, keeping a land register, and so on. But it is something more than a private document between the parties or a contract. The fact that a tariq is issued by a trusted authority of a Qadi provides the party with a public-like certification of the overall legality of the transaction. For example, the parties did lawfully hold the transacted rights, the agreed obligations were fulfilled, and so on. So not only these documents are written or transcribed in Arabic, which is a language that state judges schooled in French do not understand in Mali, but the interpretation of their content, and most importantly, the ascertainment of the reputation of their drafters require technical knowledge of Islamic legal scholars. So the more a tariq is ascertained as reliable by the Qadi, the higher will be its consideration by the judge, to the point of often being the conclusive piece of evidence. So coupled with the strategic use of such documents by the parties in illegal disputes, the involvement of Qadi reveals the hybrid character of the local administration of justice in the locality and the vestiges of an Islamic legal order that can be traced back to the pre-colonial state of Massina. Let me jump to the conclusion. So what I've tried to document in this presentation is the overlapping set of rules and practices and authorities concerning land relations in the inner delta of the Niger River, with an emphasis on the legal dimension of social relations. So attention has been paid to sociopolitical changes connected the territory of the inner delta to more extensive projects of state formation, yet still unfinished, from the 19th century pre-colonial state of Massina to the successive state projects under colonization and in post-colonial times, to something I skipped in the last two slides, but I'm going to retake in the conclusion, to the more recent state of unrest and insecurity brought by armed groups throughout the region over the last decade or so. So one characteristic that has emerged with particular vigor is the interdependence among groups with different means of livelihood based on farming, herding, and fishing, and potentially conflicting legal regimes over the natural resources they share in the same space. A number of traditional authority, customary chiefs of land, transhumance, and water are in charge of negotiating the relationship and mediating the tensions among the groups. The authority of customary chiefs finds its legitimacy in the interweaving of pre-colonial, colonial, and post-independence trajectory of state formations characterizing Sahelian societies. Traditional offices, such as the Master of Land, Waters, and Transhumance Path, are the products of social and historical transformations connecting the territory of the inner delta to broader political configurations. And in fact, local authorities act as intermediaries between such projects of state formation and the variety of groups inhabiting the space of the inner delta. Such groups are mostly based on a segmentary lineage kind of social organization based on kinship on descent, common descent from the same ancestors. So principles of first coming in occupation of the land, coupled with discourses on the mastery of symbolic and material resources, provide the grammar of a legitimate order of land and water rights, which cannot be circumvented by the state. Following the events that have developed from the insurgency of jihadist groups in the north of Mali since 2011, the region of the inner delta has been the theater of growing problems of insecurity. And in this changing scenario, the role of traditional authorities has undoubtedly been put into question, especially by jihadist groups accusing the literate elite of colluding with state officials, particularly judges, and enriching themselves through corruption. However, after an initial period of unrest, mostly functional in recruiting local fighters among disadvantaged segment of the population, armed groups seeking to give their rule some form of legitimacy turn to selected local notables to administer justice. After a series of coups and abrupt changes of geopolitical alliances, the government of Mali at this time seems to be in the process of regaining control of the inner delta, along with other parts of the country. And as demonstrated by the intensely mediated processes of dispute settlements, land relations are key to this process of negotiated return of state institutions in the locality. The way ahead seems long. Beyond the security concern brought by the availability of weapons, after almost a decade of armed conflicts, scattered, but still armed conflicts, there is now an entire economy of war to dismantle. However, there are positive signals. If anything unites the many overlapping institutions and political legal processes described in this paper. This is the hybrid, flexible, and adaptable nature of them in governing land relations in the inner delta. So I thank you for your attention and
Thank you, Luca. And now we can go on to the last presentation. So apparently a light topic for Friday afternoon, quantum computing. Yes. But apparently it is the simplest thing of all, so there should be no problem in understanding this. So please, Nicola. Nicola Crescini is a physicist and a researcher at Fondazione Bruno Kessler. And
thank you. Yeah, so a light topic for the end of the conference of today. I'm happy to be here. So I was a bit disoriented at first because the last conference I was in was this thing. And as you can tell, is very much more specific than at what we have today, which is BAM, humans and things, which to me sounds like everything, right? But so at first I was very disoriented, but then I figured that it was the first time that it happened to me that I have the chance to talk about what we do, or quantum physics in general, to an audience which is still academic, but from a different environment. So I went from disorientation to some sort of excitation. So thanks to the organizers for inviting me, and I try to convey some message. That's my attempt at it. So, okay, crafting a qubit, and we will slowly get there. So the topic here is humans and things. I will start from things. Humans will come in later. So I've seen that, I mean, all of you have talked about things in one way or the other. There were several divisions done, and one which I'm particularly interested in is artificial versus natural thing. And I think this division is clear to everybody, whether a chair is not natural while a flower is, and so on. And this will become clear, a bit more clear, let's say, towards mid-talk, more or less, why this is so important. But then let's talk about physics. So what is physics about? Physics is about simple things, whether you believe it or not. It's really about simple things. Like even the brightest physicist that we can engage in, like Galileo. Galileo was stimulated by a pendulum in a church to do all this. He was the first physicist, as a matter of fact. And we all know the story about Newton and the apple, right? So that's another example. Other sciences, they all study much more complicated things like biology, economics. There's lots of variables and things that can happen. Engineers do super complicated things. And well, bear with me, it's true. And actually, if you are interested in that, like there is, I put a QR code here for a podcast. Unfortunately, it's in Italian. It's a nice podcast about the most complicated things that mankind ever built. I won't tell you what it is, so you'll be curious. But it's just a few millimeters big, and it has something to do with talk today. If you can't scan it, I have as big as a slide at the end. So, okay, simple things. Why do we like simple things? Because simple things allow us to use math. And mathematics is the language of physics, whether we like it or not. Sometimes it's an obstacle, but sometimes it's really helpful. Okay? So there are several jokes also about people asking physicists to solve problem, and physicists say like, yes, I have a solution, but I have to assume spherical horses or stuff like this, which sounds completely unreasonable. But actually, as a matter of fact, we have several examples of when this kind of assumption of wild approximation actually works very well. And there are studies of biophysics where people explain swarms of birds moving in the sky with equations that we use to describe fluids, or how forests expand, and considering something that we are called like gases of trees, okay? Which sounds completely unreasonable, but as a matter of fact, works. But then among all these things that we can describe, what would you say is like the basic thing, the one thing to rule them all? Okay. In physics, this is like the atom. Okay. The atom is where I'm starting today. The atom, so we did some etymology. So also here we can do some etymology. I like it. Atomos, right? Something which cannot be split, cannot be divided. We all know, we saw it in Richard's talk, that actually we split the atom and there's lots of things inside. But the atom is something like the bill at a restaurant, okay? So you're 7 and you can't split it for some reasons. We all know you actually can split it, but let's say that we can't split it, okay? We can't split an atom. It is actually a fair assumption for most things. Like whatever is around us, we can touch it, we can see it. It's made of atoms, okay? And we can, there are not so many free electrons or free neutrons roaming around. For sure, there are no free quarks. So the atom, it is some building block that we can use to describe reality that we use in physics. So are we physicists? We like to use simple things, and as a matter of fact, we want also to oversimplify whatever. So when we study an atom, we imagine 2 things, electrons, nucleus, okay, 2 balls, right? One, the nucleus is very heavy. The electron is like a feather where the nucleus is a rock. And so we simplify the atom, also the atom we simplify. The simplest thing, we simplify it again. And we say, look, let's pretend that the nucleus is steady and it's only the electron which is moving around. It's what physicists call the Born-Oppenheimer approximation. Yes, okay, so cool. We know that we can rule out whatever other influence there is from outside. We do this approximation as well. We want to end up with something simple, and we end up with this. Right? So these are the equations that describe the motion of this electron around the atom. I feel your disappointment. I promised something simple, and I show up with this. You'll be like, okay, but good job. Huh? So it's not the best that we found physics if we get this. But actually, the surprising thing is that this is really, believe me, it's really the only way of making it work. Because otherwise, people have tried several ways to not use such complex equation to describe reality, and they all failed. This is quantum mechanics at its beginning, okay? And it is complicated. Quantum mechanics is complicated. It's so complicated that we can actually only solve 2 problems in quantum mechanics. The hydrogen atom, so the simplest atom, 1 nucleon, 1 electron, and the so-called harmonic oscillator, which is a pendulum, but only when the oscillations are small, so not even. So these are the 2 problems which are solvable in quantum mechanics, and there's nothing else. We build on top of these ones. So what is important in an atom? All these equations, what do they symbolize? What's the take-home message here? The only thing I want you to remember is energy levels, okay? So energy levels, you can consider them more or less as the orbits that the electron has around the atom, okay? It can move in a way or in a different way. So, okay, these energy levels, shall we visualize them? Sure, we can plot them. This is the simplest one. First energy level, okay, not so scary. Right? The equations were much worse. But then, truth is that there is a second one. See that there is a mole high-low in between, and then a third one, 4th, 5th, and so on. There are many energy levels that an atom can have, and they all exist simultaneously. Okay? They can get very complicated. They can form patterns which are anyway regular but complex. So what does this mean? So there are all these energy levels, but there is only 1 electron. So what's going on? So the electron can move between energy levels. Okay, so it can be in the lower one, but then it can jump to something a bit more fancy and do some ripples around the nucleus or something. And the thing that, so energy levels are the first thing that I want you to remember. The last thing that I want you to remember is light. So first, last is two things, not so bad. So energy levels and light. Why? Because electrons can jump between energy levels by absorbing or emitting light. Okay, so the light that is around us, the light that comes from the sun. The fact that the electron can jump through the energy levels, absorbing and emitting light, is the very reason why we see, not we see something, we see in general that we have vision, okay, that we can perceive the world around us with colors and light. Okay. So you see then emitting, so absorbing a photon, an electron can go from the first energy level to the second one. It's a bit too bright, but here there is the second halo that was there before, and then back by emitting light. Okay, so this is where our story begins. And I'm glad to see that in the past talks, there were 3 timelines. I have a timeline as well. And starting in 1920, it was mentioned already, 1920 is more or less, this is just a benchmark date. It actually started before, and then it was developing process, is when the whole world was onto quantum mechanics, because we couldn't understand anything. Everybody was so bothered because the theory that we had told us that there was no atom. The atom were not possible. The electron would have just collapsed onto the nucleus without causing anything. Everything should be just pure light and energy. And we are here, so this must be wrong. And nobody could understand why. This was really a common effort. There was lots of bright minds working on this. If I have to mention one on all of them, it's probably Niels Bohr. But there are many others that you've sure heard. Schrödinger, Heisenberg, Pauli, and all these people. Until, more or less around 1920, there was the birth of QED, which is quantum electrodynamics. So these are all electric fields, basically the electron going around the nucleus. And the father, let's say, of quantum electrodynamics is Richard Feynman. So that's where we start, but then we want to take a step forward. Okay? This is studying something. We have the atoms, we have the observation, we have the real world, and we want to understand how does it work. In 1920, let's say before 1920, we did not understand. We did not even describe things. Now that we can describe them, we start to want to put our hands on them, right? And the first attempt, the first success in starting to explore quantum physics at a somehow deeper level happened around 1950 with the so-called cavity QED. Harosh, Weiland, there are the 2 main people here. And how does that work? Well, we still can't manipulate an atom. We can't just make an energy level out of nothing. The hydrogen is there. The periodic table is there. All the atoms are there. We can't do much. We live with it. Not like we can engineer them. But we say that we can jump through energy levels with light. We can do something with light. Like light is something that we can handle a bit more easily. And we all have objects which can modify light, like can manipulate light. Mirrors, right? Mirrors are something where light is not absorbed, it's just reflected. So light is reflected, is preserved somehow. So one might wonder, okay, who has ever seen a mirror? This is more or less a philosophical question, but you see whatever is reflected on a mirror. You see a mirror because you see whatever is in front of it, but do you see the mirror? Yeah, okay. So the idea behind manipulating light to talk to the atom in a better way was to put 2 mirrors, one in front of the other. And you have 2 mirrors, which you put an object in between, and you see this nice long array of pictures. How many do you see? Infinite? Not? I leave this question for later. So the point is that if you put 2 mirrors, one in front of the other, the light will start to bounce back and forth, right? And this is what physicists call a Fabry-Perot cavity, or just in general, a cavity, if you like. Why is this interesting? Because we can limit whatever the atom can do. Like the real world here, the free space is an ugly place for an atom. There is light everywhere. The atom decays, emits light, absorbs light, the energy levels keep changing, it's not steady. It's almost impossible to study. But what if we put the very same atom in an environment which is incredibly controlled, where we have darkness apart from one color of light. Okay. Then what was interesting about cavity QED is that they found out that they can actually control the properties of the atom. They can make the atom live longer. They can excite and talk to energy levels. And this was a huge leap forward for quantum mechanics, because then we could actually do something and we didn't have to get used to whatever was there. And I think this is more or less where humans jump in this whole story, because we went from just trying to describe whatever nature gave us to put something which was ours in there. And this is more or less how two mirrors in front, one in front of each other look like. It's not as simple as something you can do in your bathroom. Okay? But yeah, the optical tables and stuff, and just FYI, these technologies are also the ones that, for example, used in gravitational waves interferometers, the one that we use to measure gravitational. It's really the same principle. So we are here. It's 50, 70 years ago. Caroline nicely showed that the curve of technological advancement is rising very fast. That's indeed true. Like our species was able to go in from the first flight with the Wright brothers to going to the moon in something like 100 years or less. Okay, and also here things are progressing quite fast. So what is the next step? We can handle light. We need to handle the atom as well. Can we do that? Yes and no. Let's pretend yes. Okay, and let's see how. One other thing that physicists like a lot are analogies and approximation. But let's first talk about analogies. We like analogies because we are fundamentally lazy, I think. And it's much better to understand one thing and then apply it to whatever else than to understand every single thing. And this is in general. Then sometimes analogies are wrong, and then but sometimes are not. Like, for example, this is one analogy, one of the most famous ones. Okay? It's like the waves, the ripples of the water when you throw a rock in a lake, and there is the wave propagating. And it's analog to the radio waves that we use for long distance communication, phones, radio, whatever else. Another one that you might not be aware of is that the laser is described in the exact same way as a cuckoo clock. Like it's really the same physics for the two of them. So I think maybe you didn't know it. And then one other approximation, one more analogy that we can make today is that maybe we can build something, a circuit, for example, that behaves like an atom. And how do we do that? So now I'm briefly going through this. This might be maybe the most tricky part. By the way, if you have questions, you're wondering something, you lost track, just interrupt me and ask. Yes. Why would you want to? Because you want to, so you have quantum mechanics, the atom is there, right? But you can't change how the atom is. You might wonder, what if the second energy level is shaped in a different way? We have no way of testing it. Can we do something with, or maybe when we have an atom with only two energy levels, which at the end of the day is going to be the aim here, we don't have that. We have hydrogen. And if we want to build things like qubits, the hydrogen atom is a horrible thing. So we want something more advanced. We want something that we can tweak. We want something that we can manipulate. And that's somehow the ultimate level of control for these kind of things. So yes, circuits, okay? So just going step by step, or maybe from the color code, you got it already. I don't need you to really understand the circuit scheme here. So for those of you who know there are capacitances, inductances and stuff, these are electrical symbols. These could as well be kanji symbols or hieroglyphics. It doesn't matter. So left and right, okay. Left orange, right blue, more or less. So orange throughout the presentation we see is what represented light. So whatever is on the left here is nothing but the analog of a cavity. The same cavity with the two mirrors where we confine light. Okay? So we have light here. And this is the thing that we engineered in the 50s, right? So we don't really care about that. But then on the right, we have another circuit. This time is blue, so it is the analog of the atom. Okay, so this is light, and this is the atom. What is the atom like, and what is the cavity? They're both circuits, as I told you. The key element in this circuit is this X here, which is what we call the Josephson junction. So really understanding how a qubit, a circuit, a qubit works means diving into the physics of Josephson junctions, which we don't have time to do today. But I just want you to know that this is like the basic element of quantum technologies, superconducting quantum technologies nowadays, like the transistor is for digital technologies. Okay, it's kind of an analog. So yeah, we got this, and we want to build this, and this circuit actually we can make it. Yes, but it's difficult because, so first it's another simplification because instead of being in 3D in the real world, is a circuit. A circuit is somehow by definition planar, like it's in 2D. So it's already much simpler to handle. You can draw it on a piece of paper, literally. And then we have to make it of some weird materials, some superconducting materials and so on that are at quantum properties, which are the ones that we leverage. At the end of the day, we just care of building a circuit which is ruled by the same equations as the hydrogen atom. This is all. To build this, to make this circuit, you just need a clean room, okay. Which is a big laboratory where there is basically no dust, where humidity and temperature is controlled, and when there are machines worth millions of euros that can make very small things, because this whole circuit is just millimeters big, but the small pieces which handle everything are micron size. So this scale here, 100 microns, is roughly the thickness of one of your hair. The junction is some small thing here, which is 1 micron big. And some of them can even be smaller. So they're very hard to handle. And now you kind of understood why we want a clean room, a room without dust, because a grain of dust is more or less as big as this whole thing. Okay. And then imagine that you have something with electrical contact and so on, and then you have some crap going on top, then it stops working completely. Okay. So we go in the clean room. We are good at fabricating stuff. Okay? We know how to do it. We draw it, and we can make it out of actually fairly simple material. Well, I've learned today of the 3 most common materials on Earth: silicon, aluminum, oxygen. That's what's in here. So it's also sustainable, probably. And we have the 2 parts of the circuit that I have drawn here. See, orange, blue. This is the cavity. This is where light is stored. And this is where the qubit is. In particular, the junction is up. So this part is behaving as some sort of artificial atom, while this part is controlling the light. And we can control it from outside, screwing cables on it, like this. So we take this circuit, which you might think to see that the circuit is actually up here. And we put this in a box. This, well, somehow the thing is, okay. But okay, this is more or less 1 centimeter. Okay. We really build the chip in here, and we put it in a controlled environment so that no stuff falls on it and nothing bad happens to the qubit. Everything very controlled, everything very safe, blah, blah, blah. And then we stick it in a fridge which goes at minus 273 degrees. Okay, so because it's delicate, no? Because, as I told you, briefly mentioned, these circuits are made of superconductors, and superconductors only work at very low temperature. Particularly these machines, these big fridges, which look really cool, by the way, are able to go to a temperature which is just some 10 millidegrees above the absolute zero temperature. It's one of the coldest things on the planet. And you see, this is very complicated. We all have these lines. These wires are just needed to handle the light, to talk to the qubit, going up and down, back and forth. And inside here, in this very clean environment, would be our qubit connected to a couple of lines. We fab circuit. We put the circuit in the fridge in this environment, which is super shielded control, and nothing happens beside what we want to happen. And then what we do is just taking data, we measure, which is my favorite part. Because by measuring, it means that you're talking to the qubit, you're talking to whatever system you have designed and fabricated with your fingers crossed for weeks, probably to see whether it behaves as you expect it to behave. And there are just so many measurements that you can make on it. Because at this point, since you can design the qubit, you really become a quantum designer. You are in control of every single parameter. You can shape this artificial atom in the way that you like. And these are some measures. These are some real data that we got in the lab about the qubit that we made a few months ago. This is just another QR code on on a link which describes this qubit. So since we have this level of control, we might wonder, what do we do with it? So many things. We can do quantum sensors. So we can have this qubit sense single photons coming from somewhere, which will make it the most precise sensor available. We can shape the qubit in a way that we can say, okay, let's do a hybrid atom, which is half hydrogen, half helium. Sure, let's just draw the circuit and we will get it and see how it would behave if it existed. Now it does somehow. Or we can build a quantum computer, which is the big promise of the industry, which is it's not just a super powerful computer. It is something which is much more difficult and involved than this. So on this, I'm not going to oversimplify. It is complicated, but still, a qubit is the bit, so it's the unit of processing in a quantum computer. Okay, so this was my last slide. Let's say that this is the group where we are working on this stuff, and this is the other FDK building, the one uphill. We are more or less in here, and that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nicola, for this outstanding presentation. We have 15 minutes we can use if we want. Probably Sarah would like to know. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so if there is someone who wants to ask something about any of the talks today, otherwise.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, no, I was saying this was both an experiment and also it was a little bit experiential, because I understand that it's not very easy to concentrate and understand other disciplines' language. We speak different languages, we refer to different things. I mean, Niccolo has made it as simple as he can, but when I saw those things, they did not look simple at all. Sorry, Niccolo. But anyway, so my question for everyone who participated today was very simple by quoting Niccolo. So what is your takeout out of a day like this? I mean, the real question is, can interdisciplinarity really work, or are we at a point in science, both in the hard sciences and in the humanities, in which we kind of have to go deep into specialization because there's no other way? I mean, is interdisciplinarity an utopia, or is it feasible? And what kind of tools, language, attitude, and even, I don't know, collaboration do we really need? So I'm going to ask this question to everyone. And of course, please, starting from the last.
Okay, tough question. So, can you give us a minute just to... so, no.
But in the meanwhile, I just wanted to say that we are just a half of our conference, so we cannot jump to conclusions yet. But yeah, I believe that, yeah, for the first day, there's, I mean, I'm not so sure. I mean, we decided to alternate lawyers and non-lawyers, because not because law is the center of everything, but just because there is I believe a majority of legal scholars among the whole panel of speakers. And on the one hand, it might have felt a little bit disorienting, but at the same time, I believe that there has been some sort of connection between all of the talks. Probably Andrea's one belongs more to tomorrow's panel rather than today's. I believe I felt the way. But I mean, of course, we are coming from different backgrounds. But at the same time, at the very least, we all understand that. I mean, at least as lawyers, understand that we need to try to reach out to how different branches of science understand reality, because as Ugo Mattei said before, to some extent, law is somehow, I mean, it is more technical. I mean, it relies a lot on the existence reality, and also on the situation other sciences are in. So I think that we have to try to understand also different branches of science. Of course, it all depends on how much time you have to spend on studying. And I mean, I think that 1 minute has passed on.
Okay. Wow. Okay. It's like a press conference. Yeah. Okay. So I was indeed disoriented at first, but I was wondering if this is really bad. It might not be. I mean, you have to be disoriented to dive into something that you don't know. And I can give you the physicist perspective on this interdisciplinary thing. And I have to say that I like it. I think we should do it more, and specifically from the physics perspective, because I felt a bit lazy again when I saw some talks beforehand, because people here are already trying to apply physical concepts like quantum mechanics or whatever in other topics, and they are inspired by that and so on. And I feel like we physicists as a community are absolutely not doing that. We are really just, we are physicists and we talk to physicists, at best somebody from mathematics or engineering, and not much more than that. And I think we are losing lots by doing that. And this, I mean, I don't know if in the past it was the same, but felt like maybe back in the days it used to be a bit more mixed and there was more interdisciplinary action, say. Nowadays, not as much. So I think it's good only to gather and talk about some topic and just see the different perspectives that people have on that. And there will be a take at the end. Because different perspective will give a new angle to observe things.
Well, to be honest, I find it a very difficult question, and that I don't conceal that like I feel to an extent disoriented, because I'm more used to the interdisciplinarity within the social sciences. But, well, for example, anthropology in itself is very much connected to an empirical analysis also of material things on which social relations are based. So I still tend to read these things from a perspective of social sciences, basically. So I'm more at ease with an interdisciplinarity, which is already an achievement from a legal perspective sometimes, no? Within the social sciences. But of course, I mean, I've been very much intrigued by what I could catch physics. I have and the perspective of physics. Also in about, for example, the scale of observation. It's been a very fascinating, and I found yes, the connection with the comparative law perspective, which Elena was pointing at after Richard's talk. And so a lot of curiosity and also admiration for the capacity to simplify, as we also witnessed in this last talk. So to simplify very complex discourses, and yeah, a lot of interest and curiosity for that. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess I found today less disorientating than an average day, because I haven't said who has done what with an exclamation mark once today, which is good. But that's probably a function of what I do day to day. So I think, you know, it's been really interesting, first of all, learning things. So, you know, water management in the upper Niger Delta, or in the Niger Delta, sorry, knew nothing about, okay, and various aspects behind legal systems, which I just never thought of before. That's really interesting. So one, there's a learning element which may not be interdisciplinarity, but it's a learning element which is useful, you know, and I think that's things to do, and that leads into actually even just the discussions and the terminology leads into a creativity in ways that you don't think of. It's not something you can plan in advance, okay? The two things I would say is not necessarily on that, but I think looking at disciplines in general, you know, and again, I'm a little bit hand waving, but I think Nicola touched on it and so on. It's often thought that, you know, physics and maths is the most complicated disciplines. And then, you know, the humanities are the soft stuff, okay? And, you know, that's sometimes how it's framed, at least in the press, okay? But actually, if you think about it, Nicola hinted at it and so on, in maths and in physics, you can calculate it, okay? Which means you have an answer, okay? And maybe you have to circle, you had a camel, not a horse, maybe it needs to be circular, you know, but you can calculate it. But then if you look at it, you know, chemistry becomes very complicated and non-calculable quickly. Proteins, absolutely almost impossible. Biology, I mean, I can't even remember the stuff, let alone do it. And then you move on to things like psychology, humans, you know, political science, legal, and so on. And of course, you know, actually, you know, people certainly don't start out today and say, oh, I'll start by describing this by an equation. So I think there, you know, that's I think the point. Whereas you can say that's the popular imagination. In fact, actually, the reason you don't use maths on it is because the complexity goes up in that direction, you know. And I always explained in the past, I had to do a lot of stuff with actual planning and project management and so on, you know, and I pointed out always that, you know, this is the mathematics of getting things done, you know, and politics is the mathematics of actually getting decisions made. And I think that's there. And therefore, you know, I think there is trying to apply the tools of one to the other may fail in general, but there may be some very interesting and radical things coming out of it where it does succeed. Now, on the failing in general, I'm going to use an analogy from a contribution which just got written up a few days ago, okay? Which I think is my view on the interdisciplinarity part of it and so on. There's a joke about a policeman finds a drunk looking for his keys underneath a lamppost, okay? And can't find them, okay? And the policeman asks the drunk, where did you lose them? In the park, okay? Why are you looking from here? Because I've got light to look for them, okay? And I think, you know, if you think of this with each of the disciplines being a lamppost, that's where everybody looks day to day, okay? And of course, you know, you don't look in between because you don't have the tools to look under that lamppost. You don't have any light and you can't look in between. But actually, of course, there's a lot of stuff that's not found there. There's all the rubbish as well, okay? But, you know, I think it's a good opportunity to start. And you just have to accept that quite a lot of the stuff you're going to be doing in that darkness, you're going to find a lot of rubbish. And hopefully every now and again, there'll actually be a gem coming out of it. So those are just my observation answering the question and two comments on that.
Andrea, do you want to say something? You're on the phone.
No, it's the story that you just told about the drunk man that it was looking for the keys under the light is from who? You don't know. This is the Iranian, is the, yeah, it's a woman, yeah. Yeah, no, because the strange thing is that the same story, we tell the same story in order to explain what's comparative law is. You know, because with comparative law, we think that we are going to look at in the dark place. You don't have to look at where the things are simple or where they appear to you. You have to go beyond what the thing and look at it in the dark place. This was the one of the things I think I told you, one of the things that Beta Grande in says the story in this. And no, for doing that, I'm totally agree with you. First of all, the discipline is that just to, you know, to know something that you don't know, because we are curious, we are just want to start a dialogue. I don't know where we are going to, what, but for sure, as far as I understood from this, also with natural science and the human science and that, it was in the past, you know, with Cartesian and the thing in which you have a cultural coordinate that they put like a method of thinking that was, but we can explain in the same way, you know, the positivistic way to look at the world. Now we have another you know, challenge. We have like a quantum revolution. What can we learn from the quantum revolution? We, as a lawyer, because lawyers have a different task. You know, the physicists maybe they describe the reality or try to describe the reality, but make it simple. That is not that easy. The lawyer has I think a different task, because for the lawyer, the task of the lawyer is, or the jurist, like than the lawyer, but is prescriptive. I try to tell you that how should be in this way. And from this point of view, I think this interrelationship or this dialogue should teach us as a lawyer. This is the reason because I try to start this, to try to make a different kind of reasoning around what we are looking now as a positive data that is it.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for organizing this. I found it very stimulating, and I must say I'm still learning, and today I learn a lot. And I think that what I pick up is I'm still very enthusiastic about learning the way in which, for instance, in physics, you describe and observe your own discipline, because it gives us stimulus in order to observe our discipline. That I'm not saying something new, because this is exactly what our master did with linguistic. So he imported methods and models of linguistic, how linguistic used to observe their own discipline. The model, the circulation of the model, for example, come from linguistics. So I'm trying to do the same. And the second thing is probably as a jurist, we have to make ourselves understood clearly because we also are, scientists having problem and trying to find way of solving our problems. But I have the impression that our world is considered much more abstract and theoretical and complicated. And in the reality, we are also social actors. So we have open problems and we have to find solutions.
Back to your original question, if I've got this right, is there's value to be had, and just like a couple of very quick thoughts would be, I think it's about finding people who want to be in the room. So maybe there will be people who want to stay in their niche and don't want to have a transdisciplinary dialogue. I think it's very much about the individual. And that doesn't take away or give anything to an individual should they choose to partake or not. I think there's more than information that can be exchanged. I think there's a cultural component. Nicola and I were talking at the coffee break. This is way less intimidating than a science niche conference where people are literally there to tear down your idea. Like no one is bigging you up. Maybe your team are, but it can be very, very aggressive, the environment. This was much more pleasant to come into. And I think in terms of the value, the potential for value, so there's the cultural component, there's if people want to be there. And I see it sort of like a heartbeat, whether someone turns up. So we have the heart contracting when we push the blood out through the body. And that's like when we're focused and like with our core group of disciplined people, and everybody gets comfort from their core group of people. But like when there's expansion and it opens opportunity for possibility, that's maybe when the blood rushes in and you get everyone together. And in thinking of ways to communicate your field to non-field experts also requires a different way of thinking, which can actually lead to further self-information about the topic. So I think there's more value that like there's potential for value, but it's down to the individual if they want to do it.
Well, I do have a few thoughts. I will speak tomorrow on the virtuality. And I came here and thought, okay, it's a lot of focus on law. But what I find interesting about these types of interdisciplinary gatherings, as an interdisciplinary scientist myself, is how much we actually do have in common despite our different expertises and different focus. And much of it comes down to philosophy of science, comes down to the ontology. Like how do we actually work with the world? How do we view the world? And I see a lot of commonalities here that I maybe wouldn't have thought of existing. So I think it's very enlightening. And I agree also with the comment that it's a very inviting atmosphere to be in, to have these discussions. You are not presenting some little niche project you did where you had to go through, I don't know how many reviews to get something published, but you are presenting your thoughts on a somehow much bigger abstraction level, yet still concrete. I don't know if that makes sense, but I really like it. And thanks for the invitation. Thank you.
We can also I mean, I don't want to censor anybody, but we can also continue this conversation over dinner. Yeah, no.
I was planning to remain unknown for the evening. Okay, a couple of things. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not working as a mathematician, but I'm a mathematician by training. And I can tell you that if an algebraist writes a paper with a geometer, they claim they're doing interdisciplinary studies. Okay, so it is really relative of what you think. And when you move up enough, everything becomes very similar because we use the same basic conceptual systems to make sense of what we do. So the problem for me is that interdisciplinary is not objective, it's a relative term. You don't do it for doing it. You do maybe to learn something new, but if you want to really do interdisciplinary study, in my mind, you have to have a reason to do it. So curiosity goes to a certain point, and then you stop there because you have other things to do. You have a life. That's my problem. Interdisciplinary is on fashion, so okay. Everybody talks with somebody else's. Think about it, but that's not enough. I cannot tell you what to do, but there has to be something coming out. At that point, you might claim you're doing interdisciplinary studies. It takes a little more thought, I believe. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you, everybody.